The 27th of March 1986 was just a regular day in the heart of Melbourne. But just after 1 p.m, that normality was shattered when a car bomb exploded outside the city's police headquarters. It was an attack that changed a city.
There was just an absolute feeling of total disbelief that this could happen in Melbourne.
There was even a feeling amongst the criminal fraternity that it was a step too far.
A car bomb that struck at the very heart of Victoria.
This was more like a scene from Beirut than lunchtime Melbourne.
I thought the roof was going to come in, so I belted out.
It would take diligent detective work and forensic science to bring the bombers to justice.
We were able to piece together, bit by bit, what was in the vehicle at the time it was detonated outside Russell Street.
The Russell Street bombing was a crime that shook Australia. It was approaching lunchtime on the 27th of March 1986. Office workers, court officials and police were going about their business, sitting at their desks, attending meetings or planning what they would have for their lunch. But in one instant, hundreds of lives were changed forever.
At the third stroke, it will be 12, 59 and 50 seconds.
VK Russell Street 150, you receive that?
Yes, Russell 150, there's no further personnel required. I will, for the time being, leave a static presence here until we see what develops. Over.
Roger that. And VK Russell Street 130, negative, no further police required at the scene. The 150 will leave some members static in St Kilda Road. Received?
30, copy.
That particular day I didn't have a busy morning, so I actually went up to the Australian Taxation Office to pick up some forms as it was tax time for all of the staff in my office. And on returning, I had an appointment at 1 o'clock with a client, and I was aware that I was right on that time.
It was very busy police-wise, very busy court-wise, just a normal day.
I was allocated to the civil court that day. A former colleague of mine was to pick me up approximately at 1 o'clock, so I was on the western side of Russell Street, on the court side, with the police headquarters directly in front of me.
I turned left into Russell Street from Latrobe Street, looked for a parking spot and saw one right at the front of Russell Street and did notice a brown Commodore sedan parked there.
Also on Russell Street that lunchtime was a young police officer serving at the City Watch House, opposite the Russell Street headquarters. Her name was Angela Taylor, and she had just volunteered to collect lunch.
I watched Angela Taylor leave the building. She left from the main entrance on the Russell Street side of the Magistrates Court, came down the steps, started to cross the road.
As I got around the corner, I became aware that it was actually very quiet, and I was just about to run across the road so I could make my 1 o'clock appointment when I noticed a car coming from my right through the intersection of Latrobe Street. And I thought, no, I'll let this car go. And as he got adjacent to me, I looked back at the Commodore and up it went.
Russell Street 750. Say Russell Street 750.
Russell 750.
750, I presume you heard that loud explosion right next to you?
Russell 750, it totally shattered our windows. Roger that, Russell Street 306. All units approach with caution just in case there's a second.
There is 2 on 4 on St Kilda Road just approaching the city. What's going on? We're having loud explosions. We've had a car bomb in Russell Street outside the police station.
Unbeknownst to the witnesses that day, the Holden Commodore parked outside the Russell Street Police headquarters contained almost 60 sticks of explosive, packed into the boot, centre console and glove box of the car.
It blew me about 6 or 7 or 8 metres back into the bluestone wall of the magistrate's court. The car completely disintegrated and there was metal flying everywhere.
All of a sudden then I was aware that my left thigh had been struck by something. My second thought was that this is a bomb.
Yeah, that car's still on fire. Can we have the fire brigade here, please? Roger, stand by.
I looked behind and saw this big black plume of smoke and saw that it was in the vicinity of Russell Street. People are coming out and walking towards to see where that explosion is coming from.
Right back.
A sea of confusion, and as you may see in some footages, the people are coming out, the minor explosions now occur.
There's been a second explosion. Unit, stay away from the area.
What were I believe to be petrol tanks and the likes. But even as a trained investigator, I didn't turn my mind to a terrorist act.
I'm sure there was a shock component that kicked in because although I had clearly a serious injury to my leg, I wasn't even aware of the pain.
There was a great deal of panic. I remember some of the one particular policeman who appeared to have just lost control. He was screaming at people and quite frankly he wasn't doing any good. The police decided that we were in an unsafe situation because there were still some explosions going on. So I was told, take your ambulance and the people you've got on board and move further back.
The communications section was on the first floor, which is only just slightly above the level of the street. And fortunately that particular building, that particular office had very heavy curtains on it, and a lot of the shrapnel and the glass, of course, that blew inwards when the car bomb detonated, it was caught by the heavy curtains in the communication centre. Otherwise, of course, there could have been people in that part of the building that could have suffered very serious facial injuries, of course, from flying debris and glass.
Across Russell Street, the magistrate's court had also been damaged by the explosion. Lawyer Bernie Barmer was in his office when the bomb detonated, and in the chaos, he realised he needed to get out.
I thought the roof was going to come in, so I belted out and straight down the steps into Russell Street where I ran into poor old Angela. And what drew me to her attention is that, like, her bootlaces were on fire. Her clothing had been predominantly blown off.
Angela Taylor had been caught by the full force of the blast and had suffered horrific injuries.
She was the bravest girl of all get out, and she was uttering things like the bastards and shit like that. She must have been in huge pain.
7507, we have people with injuries. We require an ambulance, please.
I was working retail and it was just a small toy shop, and I had the radio on and they said there's been a bombing and there's been a woman that's hurt. And my first instinct and thought was, it's not my Angie, they're talking about a woman and I've got a little girl.
Angela and the other wounded, including fellow officer Constable Carl Donadio and Ian West, were rushed to hospital. The two men were suffering from severe leg injuries after being hit by shrapnel. Back at the scene, there was a dawning realisation that the very fabric of Melbourne had changed forever.
It just, all of a sudden, everything changed. From a bustling city that Melbourne was in that time, it went quiet. It was an unusual quietness all through Melbourne that I'd never really seen before. There were people on the streets, but a lot of people just standing around, couldn't understand what was happening.
We couldn't even let people in to put the fire out at that stage because we didn't know what else was there, and ended up having
a man suited up with the appropriate clothing protection to go in there and put the fire out.
As soon as the fire was under control, police moved in to lock down the scene and ensure there were no further explosive devices. The fact that Australia was at that time unfamiliar with the threat of terrorist bombs made their task all the more challenging.
Immediately after the bombing, and even the first responders, there was just an absolute feeling of total disbelief that this could happen in Melbourne. Before this incident, we'd had minor incidents that might get you a bit concerned, but this was an absolute attack on police and society in Melbourne.
The Victoria Police response was to form a dedicated task force of detectives. Their purpose? To bring those responsible for one of the most heinous acts of terrorism Australia had witnessed to justice.
Job one was the crime scene. We virtually closed off a city block, and we started on the outside and worked our way in because, of course, we needed to reopen the streets. So a search was done on the buildings surrounding Russell Street, and everything that was found within that precinct was labelled, photographed in situ, and it was a very steady, systematic processing of the scene.
As detectives began to piece together the vast quantities of forensic evidence at the scene, tragic news reached the task force. Their friend and colleague, Angela Taylor, had lost her fight for life 24 days after the explosion. She was the first female police officer in Australia to be killed in the line of duty.
She was compassionate, and if she had a skill that she could help someone with, she would want to use it.
That's pretty well why she wanted to join the police force. Yeah, she wanted to
make a difference.
She wanted to put something back into the community. She was that way inclined.
It was a comfort to know that the people that she worked with wanted to do what they could. I remember there was a young woman that was in her squad that wanted to be outside her room, and she volunteered to do that. And that must have been very hard because the whole squad, I'm pretty sure, was close to Angela.
I think it's fair to say investigating the murder of a colleague it has a lot of responsibility. You have to maintain a very strict discipline around this is another investigation. But behind it, of course, there is a fact, and an indisputable fact, that this was an attack on us.
In March 1986, the city of Melbourne was reeling from a terrorist attack that targeted police officers. The car bomb that exploded outside police headquarters tragically claimed the life of a female police officer who succumbed to her wounds 24 days later. As the people slowly came to terms with what had happened, police focused their efforts on finding those responsible.
As a result of the bombing, just about every criminal haunt in Victoria, if not Australia, was raided. Turned up guns and drugs and whatever, and I think even the part of the criminal element thought that this was a no-no.
There was even a feeling amongst the criminal fraternity that it was, that this was a step too far, and of course, the byproduct of that was it brought a lot of attention to the criminal fraternity, and there was probably attention that they would prefer not to have in the circumstances. So there was a fair degree of animosity towards the people that were behind the Russell Street bombing.
Detectives faced the huge challenge of recovering the thousands of pieces of evidence that were spread over 3 city blocks. Any single fragment could have represented the vital clue that would lead police to whoever planted the bomb.
And we were able to piece together, bit by bit, what was in the vehicle at the time it was detonated outside Russell Street.
Piecing together that car bit by bit is one of the most amazing things I've ever seen. How they found bits of that car a kilometre away and were able to put it in the right spot. Amazing, amazing investigation.
And our headquarters was over 50 metres or more away from the blast, and yet the roof of the ambulance headquarters had shrapnel spread across it. And I think this piece indicates just the size of the shrapnel that was launched and that distance. The actual gauge of the steel is extremely thick compared to what a modern car would be, and to think what this could have done should there been more people in Russell Street at the time, I think our injury level could have been much, much higher.
The bomb was an offcut of 4x2 timber, where by the alarm going off on the alarm clock completed the electronic circuit between a battery and the electric detonators, which of course caused the bomb to detonate. A crude but effective device.
Despite the fact the scene was littered with forensic evidence, police were still unable to pinpoint any individuals who may have been responsible for planting the bomb. That was to change, however, when the Russell Street Task Force were made aware of a bank robbery that took place just hours after the bombing.
4 o'clock on the afternoon of the bombing, there was an armed robbery committed on the National Australia Bank at Donvale. The getaway vehicle was a silver Holden Brock Special. That silver Brock Special was located in the Yarra River at Wonga Park, a northern suburb of Melbourne, some days after the Russell Street bombing. This vehicle was put on the back of a flat-top trailer and taken to the Coot Road compound, and 2 detectives from the Stolen Motor Vehicle Squad were there to meet it. Sitting in the corner of the Coot Road compound was the remnants of the Russell Street bomb car. So Arthur Adams and John Bradbury, 2 of the detectives from the Stolen Motor Vehicle Squad, they started out of curiosity looking at the bomb wreck, and they were both surprised to see that the identifying numbers in the chassis had been drilled out, because that to them was an unusual way of removing identifying numbers from a vehicle. The most common way of doing it was to grind them. The Silver Brock Special arrived on the back of the flat top, and it was unloaded, and they opened up the bonnet, and the first thing they noticed was it had also had its chassis numbers drilled out. They were rather astonished. They found 2 vehicles in the one place on the one day that had been dealt with in an identical fashion. So Arthur Adams, the sergeant, came back to the task force office, and he made a statement there, and then he said, "I believe the person who stole the bomb car also stole that Silver Rock Special."
Detectives now turned their attention to the theft of the car involved in the bank robbery. Police discovered that the getaway car's number plates had actually been recovered following a car chase some weeks before, involving known criminal Peter Reid. Could he be the link between the bomb car and the getaway vehicle? On the 25th of April 1986, almost a month after the bombing, police raided 3 addresses connected to Reid and his brother, Stephen Komiarzik.
It was Anzac Day, it was the 25th of April. A series of raids were conducted simultaneously at Reid's address in Callista, at 15 Harros Avenue, Nuttawading, and at Stephen Komiarzik's address in Olive Grove, Boronia.
As the detectives approached the properties, they were tragically unaware of what lay ahead.
The armed robbery squad members who went to Peter Reid's address were met with gunfire.
He's standing up on the bed, shooting it out. Mark Wiley got shot in the stomach, who was lucky to survive.
Mark was one of the first people through the door at the Callista address. And as Mark approached Peter Reid's bedroom, Reid stood up and fired at him with a revolver. And a number of shots come through the wall and the door. And 2 of them, from memory, struck Mark, and he went down in a critical condition. Steve Quincy was a detective sergeant at the Stolen Motor Vehicle Squad at the time. He courageously went into the line of fire and he returned fire and wounded Peter Reid. Of course, at that stage we had a very seriously injured police officer and a very seriously injured offender.
Mark Wiley and Peter Reid were both rushed to hospital for life-saving surgery. Meanwhile, back at the property, a thorough search was underway.
In a canvas army-style bag, we found gelignite and detonators. There were some firearms found at the address, which interestingly had the identifying numbers drilled out of them in an identical way to the motor vehicle. We also found a copy of a newspaper wrapped around some gelignite and a petty criminal named Rodney Minogue. His fingerprint was on one of the pages. We also found a partial fingerprint on the toilet door that belonged to another petty criminal named Craig William John Minogue. We were then very interested in speaking to the Minogue brothers, and despite our best efforts, we were just unable to locate them.
Unfortunately for the police, Craig Minogue and his brother Rodney had disappeared. As the search for them got underway, attention turned to an individual who was staying at the Harros Avenue address named Carl Zelinka. He had no previous criminal history, but detectives were sure he knew more than he was telling them.
We actually spoke to Carl and spoke to him about his knowledge of the Minogues, and he denied knowing them and denied knowing Peter Reid, and we knew that wasn't right because we'd spoken to his neighbours and we'd shown neighbours photographs of the Minogues and Peter Reid, and neighbours had identified them as being people that frequented 15 Harros Avenue, Nunawading. So Carl was lying through his teeth to us, but we couldn't quite work out what the motivation for it all was at that stage.
From the examination of the crime scene, the forensic were able to put together how the bomb had been set up. And it had been put on a block of wood with an alarm clock. As a result of going to Harros Avenue, Nunawading, we found that the block of wood matched a fence post at Harros Avenue.
Some slivers of timber which fitted perfectly across a fault line in the bomb block and also still attached to the fencing. So we knew in our own mind then scientifically that the bomb block of wood had come from the fence line at 15 Harros Avenue, Nunawading, and we then formed a fairly strong view that Carl Zelinka knew a lot more about the Minogues and Peter Reid than he was telling us.
Faced with increasingly incriminating evidence against him, Zelinka began to talk, and one of the crucial pieces of information he provided was the name of another man who he thought could be involved.
They used to refer to him as Stan the Man, and I had a very diligent detective on my crew named Mark Harris, and I said to Mark, go to the record section and find Stan the Man. And he found a male person in his early 50s, Stanley Brian Taylor, whose driver's licence was registered to the Minogue's parents' address. That then formed the identification of Stan the Man.
Yeah, he'd been involved on the wrong side of the law for most of his life, from the age of 12, I think. And he'd done a lot of hold-ups and other crimes.
He was a serious armed robber, really not the type of fellow you'd expect to be hanging out with a couple of young fellows like the Minogues. But what had happened was that when Stan was released from prison, he'd become a social worker, and he was employed out in the Murrelbark area to work with youth, supposedly to keep them out of trouble and to not make the mistakes in life that he'd made.
He was fairly charismatic. He'd been to jail, he'd robbed banks, he'd come out, he used to get acting bit parts in Australian drama series. So he had some sort of allure for these young men, and he groomed them in the guise of helping them on the straight and narrow. He was in fact grooming them to be young attack dogs, and he turned them into very effective armed robbers.
This afternoon, a man was flown to Swan Hill by the police air wing. The Birchip man has also agreed to a further interview period by police over the Russell Street bombing.
He knew his way around the system very well, but he also knew that first in was best dressed when it came to doing deals.
Taylor immediately nominated the Minogues and Peter Reid as the Russell Street bombers. Not so quick to implicate himself.
Stanley Brian Taylor eventually gave us the phone number for the boys, which turned in to be the Lady Jane Motel at Swan Hill. They raided the motel room and the two boys were in bed, and the loaded sawn-off shotgun was laying on the floor between them. As they were arrested and being led out of the room, Craig Minogue said to Rodney, "Remember the rules, Rodney." And that's all he said. From that stage on, he wouldn't be interviewed, he wouldn't talk at all. But they were all subsequently charged with the bombing.
With the chief suspects in custody, detectives focused their attentions on the next challenge: to assemble a case that would convince a jury that they had caught the right men. In 1988, the trial began of the men charged with committing one of the most heinous acts of terrorism in Australian history. A huge car bomb had claimed the life of 21-year-old police officer Angela Taylor and sent shockwaves through the city. As the court date approached, the meticulous and diligent police investigation into who had planted the bomb was about to be revealed.
The volume of physical evidence was staggering, really, and how we could tie each person into it. But all that had to come into the court, so it was good evidence.
Another major source of evidence came from an associate of Craig Minogue, Taylor and Reid, called Paul Hetzel. He had a history of violent crime and robbery, and when arrested in June 1986, he agreed to tell what he knew about the plot. He described the alleged bombers as having a hatred of police and a desire to kill as many officers as possible.
Now, Hetzel was an interesting character. He knew straight away who was involved in the Russell Street bombing, and he'd been privy to conversations in the lead up to it, and we located him a couple of days after the arrest of Stan Taylor, and Gary Ayres and I interviewed Paul Hetzel over the course of a day or two, and he told us the whole history, filled in a few missing spots that we were unaware of course, and that Karl Zelenka wasn't aware of. So Hetzel virtually filled in all the missing pieces that we hadn't at that stage.
The trial of the alleged bombers began in January 1988. Peter Reid, Craig and Rodney Minogue, and Stan Taylor faced a number of charges, including murder and conspiring to blow up the Russell Street Police headquarters. In proceedings before the trial started, the charges against Stephen Komiarczyk were dropped due to insufficient evidence.
The offenders were faced a committal proceeding at the Melbourne Magistrates Court, and in fact I was the first witness. And I gave my evidence of my observations, and as I walked out of the court, Craig Minogue spat on me, and I just looked at him and walked out.
Well, it was one of the longest criminal trials in Victoria's history. Trial raged for months. Witnesses were in the witness box for days on end. The integrity of people was attacked by defence counsel, as is normal in a high-profile criminal trial. I will say this: Hetzel and Zelenka gave evidence that, in my mind, was 100% truthful. We'd corroborated virtually everything that those two men told us. Unfortunately, it's difficult when you have a criminal giving evidence in a criminal trial against his colleagues. There's no doubt in my mind that the jury were quite happy with Karl Zelenka because he did not have a criminal history. I'm not sure they were as convinced as to Paul Hetzel's integrity.
In August 1988, and after a trial that lasted almost 8 months, featuring 156 witnesses, at last the jury returned its verdict.
Stan Taylor was convicted. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, never to be released. Craig Minogue was convicted. He was sentenced to 40 years with a 27-year minimum. Young Rodney Minogue was convicted and sentenced to accessory after the fact to the Russell Street bombing. Peter Reid was acquitted. However, he was convicted by the jury of using a firearm to prevent apprehension and attempted murder of Detective Sergeant Steve Quincy, who was the police officer who actually shot him. Peter Reid's acquittal was a bitter pill. The jury were locked up for months in a very difficult criminal trial. You can never be critical of juries. They do their very best in very difficult circumstances. And I think really when you look at the evidence they listened to, they gave a verdict that was in their mind was the correct and just one to give. So, that's life.
Handing down one of the toughest sentences since the abolition of the death penalty in Australia, the judge likened the actions of Craig Minogue and Stan Taylor to an act of war. Rodney Minogue's conviction was later overturned on appeal. His brother Craig is eligible for parole from 2016.
Craig Minogue, he's made something of himself whilst he's in custody. He's a PhD or a doctorate of some sort. It's going to be up to someone like the parole board to be able to make that decision and say, well, is he a fit person to be put back into the community? Has he been rehabilitated?
Look, Craig Minogue is a very dangerous individual who demonstrated he was capable of extreme violence. I'll always be very concerned that the real Craig Minogue might one day do something else if he is released. Stan Taylor, of course, will never be released. Stan's a dreadful human being. His life has just been one catastrophic waste. He's damaged a lot of people along the way. My understanding is he really has a visitor in prison, and he's going to die in prison, a lonely old man, and which is really what he deserves.
7507, we have people with injuries. We require an ambulance, please.
It was a statement of war, and all I can say is those who were involved in it, all I can say, they are the biggest fucking cowards you can ever imagine. How dare they, with a car full of explosives, park out in front of a police station, have no regard to anyone coming in and out of courts, walking up and down streets, and are prepared to blow everyone up. I'd look them in the eye and tell them, you're just fucking cowards.
I don't believe any of these people should ever be released back into society. If someone's got a propensity to do what they did, that propensity will still be there. And if they do get out, it's my firm belief that they won't last very long.
With the perpetrators locked up for their offences, the city of Melbourne tried to move on. That is until 1992, when the disappearance of a young teenage girl, 6 years after the explosion, would bring the Russell Street bomb back to the headlines. With the Russell Street bombers behind bars after a trial that lasted 8 months, Melbourne began to move on. Until the abduction of a girl made headlines, and rumours began to circulate that it was connected to the bombing.
Prue Bird was the teenage daughter of a woman called Jenny Bird, and Prue Bird disappeared in 1992. One sunny Sunday afternoon, she vanished from the face of the earth. Her mother suspects from very early days that it's a very sinister disappearance connected with her mother's connection with this major criminal.
Prue's grandmother, Julie, had started a relationship with a man closely associated with the Russell Street bombing. His name was Paul Hetzel, the star witness in the trial of the bombers back in 1988.
She met Paul when she used to visit jail. When he gets out of jail, he manipulates her to purchase weapons, to have driver's licences and to rent properties, houses and things. All he brings to the relationship is a briefcase with a pistol in it. He's a very bad man. He knows other very bad men. Among them are a group of people led by a man called Stan Taylor, and including two brothers, Rodney and Craig Minogue, and another man called Peter Reid.
As these four men were standing trial, charged with numerous offences relating to the Russell Street bombing, disturbing rumours began to surface.
During the court case, Prue's grandmother gives evidence that one of the bombers, Craig Minogue, had once threatened her, and he had said to her, if you ever talk about us or dob us into the police or inform, what will happen to one of your grandkids, like dear little Prue?
Allegedly, Minogue made that threat to the Hetzels when Prue Bird was there at 7 years of age, asleep in the other room. Now, Craig Minogue denies that, but I believe the Hetzels.
Craig Minogue has consistently denied making any such threat to Julian Paul Hetzel about their granddaughter Prue and any involvement in her disappearance. Her body has never been found. In 2009, new information came to light that seemingly pointed police in a new direction.
17 years later, in jail in Victoria, a very bad man called Leslie Camilleri starts talking about being connected with not only the murders he's been convicted of, which were horrific murders, he starts to tell people that he was involved in the Prue Bird case. The police get to hear about this. They go and see him and they said, look, we just want to clear this up, can you help? Leslie Camilleri is a monster, but he's a monster who doesn't want to get himself killed in jail. And he realises if he gives a very clear story, that there's a fair chance that he will be killed in jail. So what he does is he goes to court and he gives a sort of a lame half version of the truth. And he said that he had abducted Prue, but he wouldn't supply all the links and he wouldn't identify where the body was.
Leslie Camilleri was found guilty and in 2013 sentenced to 28 years for admitting the murder of Prue Bird. He refused to give any details about the circumstances of her death and the location of her body. Despite his claims he acted alone, some remain convinced there was another person involved. For others, the links between Prue's disappearance and the Russell Street bomb refused to fade away.
I believe the threat was made, and I don't think Camilleri's telling everything that he knows. He certainly admitted killing the girl, but there's a lot more behind it. There's more to it, and I think even any investigator will say the same, but unless you get the information, you can't take it any further.
I'm certain in my own mind that Prue Bird was murdered as a consequence of Julian Paul Hetzel's evidence they gave at the trial.
The Russell Street bomb was one of the first major terrorist attacks the state of Victoria had witnessed. It is nothing short of miraculous that the explosion claimed only a single life. Both Ian West and Constable Carl Donadio, who were severely wounded by shrapnel from the bomb, recovered from their injuries. The mental scars for them and the city as a whole, however, were not so quick to heal.
It seemed to me that criminals in Victoria had reached that moral level where they just didn't care what they did. And I think Russell Street was the start of that.
The Russell Street bombing was a turning point in the history of Melbourne. It is still talked about, and it's amazing how many people, when it comes up or the anniversaries come up, Everyone remembers where they were and what they were doing at that particular time.
Probably won't leave me. But we'll do the best we can. But I just feel so sorry for the Taylor family. As I said, they haven't had the benefit of seeing her marry, having grandkids. Yeah, no, it's awful.
Angela's left a lot behind to remind everybody of the work that she did and the love that she had for a job. One of the lovely tangible things is Angela's rose, and that's beautiful. And that's around some police stations and, it's everywhere, isn't it, Arthur? And so we have the Blue Ribbon Foundation with all the fun runs and activities where money is raised. It goes to giving equipment to hospitals so that the life continues on. Even though we haven't got Angela in her way, she's still working to save other lives.
Almost 30 years after the explosion, the Russell Street bomb claimed another victim. Mark Wiley, the detective shot during the raid on Peter Reid's address, tragically took his own life in 2014.
Mark Wiley was a colleague of mine in the Victoria Police and a thorough gentleman and one of the best investigators I ever worked with. And he's a perfect example of the effects of trauma can have on you years later. You know, we all knew Mark was in a bit of trouble mentally for the last 12 months of his life. A lot of people tried to assist him, but unfortunately it didn't work.
I don't think Mark ever recovered. He had demons after being shot and the dreadful consequences of that.
One of the tragedies of it all, that people don't know what's going on in other people's heads or their minds or their hearts, and often they don't seek the help they clearly need. Although tragically it's only clear that they need it after the event and after it's too late.
Constantly dealing with traumatic incidents and constantly being in a situation where there's a degree of physical risk, there's no doubt in my mind that that we all pay a price for that. I think we really need to do a lot more work around looking after some of those people than we probably do at the moment. And I think Victoria Police as an organisation, we're really starting to closely look at this now and starting to put things in place where we deal with this. See, of course, the difficulty is when these people leave our organisation, they get lost. And I think Mark was an example of that.
Just 90 minutes drive southeast of Melbourne, Phillip Island, with its rugged beauty, is the perfect destination for a short break. But in August 2009, that tranquility was shattered when human remains began to wash up onto the shore.
Police are hoping missing person reports could shed some light on a gruesome find at Phillip Island.
The grisly discovery would stun a family.
There was a black and white photo of a tattoo and something about a leg being found, and I looked at it and I thought, what's that?
They say they're confident they're closing in on Rachel's killer, and quickly.
He asked her whether she'd like to come in and see a dissection.
The dark past of a killer would shine a light on the nation's justice system.
This guy is a master manipulator. He had people wrapped around his little fingers, and the system allowed him out to do this.
There is no such thing as closure for me, and there never will be. There never has been any sense of closure at all.
Revelations in court would uncover one of Australia's most evil killers.
God knows what he really did, or even definitely where he did it, because no DNA was recovered from the bathroom where she was supposed to have been cut up.
The murder of Rachel Betts was a crime that shook Australia. In August 2009, 27-year-old childcare worker Rachel Betts went missing from her home in Epping, a northern suburb of Melbourne. What happened to her would leave a family devastated and shine a light on the nation's criminal justice system.
At the start of Rachel's life, Rachel was an only child for about 11 years. I had her at a time when most of my friends didn't have children, so she was very popular with my friends. She was a real asset to the family all the time. She was great with her cousins, my nieces. She was the eldest of the 7 girls.
Rachel was a very loving girl. It's not unusual in a step-parenting situation where the children are not too happy about one of their parents having a new partner and vice versa, and possibly having step-siblings. And Rachel built bridges between my children and the younger 2 girls.
Rachel was really good at making friends with strangers pretty much on the spot. Anybody she wanted to meet, she would just march right up and do so. Very bubbly and very good at making people feel welcome and like they were instantly the most important person around her. Just fun and lovable.
Although we lived together, sometimes we didn't see each other every day. I'd hear her get up in the morning. I always knew she was up and awake and getting ready because I could smell her toast and coffee.
She was always happy and bouncy. She was always happy to see you, happy to help. She was just one of those people who inspired you to be better. She was Rachel. You have a problem, you call her, she's there.
I could always call and talk to her if I was, say, having an argument at home or worried about school or my personal issues with friends or anything like that. She always made us feel that she would never judge us.
As she got older, she began to be interested in other things like education. She really wanted to be a teacher and a carer of children, which might have been influenced by babysitting us all the time.
Rachel had devoted her life to children. By the age of 27, she had a successful career as a childcare worker. But unfortunately, she wasn't able to have children of her own. In late 2008, she met 2 teenagers who were looking for a place to stay. Rachel's caring nature meant she was quick to welcome them into her home.
Rachel had met them through a friend of ours' neighbour, so they started to drop in and they were both having issues at home. So Rachel, being Rachel, went, any problems, you can always come here and stay here.
When Rachel took the girls in October 2008, November 2008, the second one, they really took over her life. And at first I thought that they were the source of the problems. The longer the girls were with her, the more she seemed run down, and I was sort of thinking, well, she's overworked and this is getting too much for her.
She was always stressed about money and being able to get by, basically being able to provide. It had 2 jobs and she lost one of them.
Faced with an ever-dwindling income, looking after the 2 girls was beginning to take its toll on Rachel and left her in an increasingly vulnerable situation. When an opportunity to make some extra money arose, Rachel was keen to take advantage.
Rachel had met a fellow, and this fellow had been working with an older man, and that older man had said to this guy that he was looking for young people to recruit to sell drugs, and for some reason this guy introduced Rachel to him, and as I understand it, came round and did a sell, you know. Oh, look at you, you're trying to look after 2 kids and you're working so hard with 2 jobs, and, you know, you could have the girls through the day and run them around, and at night time you could go out to some nightclubs and pubs or whatever, and you can meet up with people, you can sell some drugs, you'll make a lot of money, your life will be easier, things will be better for you if you do this. How he managed to make that sell, I don't know, but she decided to give it a go. I guess she probably thought I could stop work for a while, see how it goes, you know. The problem with when you're moving with people who take those drugs, rather than just selling it, she was actually taking it. And it began to have quite a severe effect on her after a while.
Rachel began abusing crystal meth, or ice, an insidious drug that is ravaging parts of Australia. It began to take a terrible toll on Rachel, both physically and mentally, and her life began to spiral out of control.
We actually end up having, after living together for years, end up having a bit of an argument, and I moved out in March of 2009. I can honestly say she probably knew me better than anybody, and same for me with her, but by that time I couldn't tell you what she'd been up to for the day. Usually I could tell you what she ate for breakfast, lunch and dinner.
She started to develop some of these symptoms of paranoia, and it was obvious that something was wrong. She said there were all these people she didn't know were coming around, friends of the young girls were coming around, and she was feeling uncomfortable and unsafe. This paranoia thing that comes with taking these drugs was affecting her. She started becoming delusional. She had all kinds of strange experiences where she thought she was being watched or being followed. She was involved in a car accident where this car came through a red light and she thought that it had been set up and somehow deliberate. These sort of delusional ideas that do come with that particular drug, ice. Her teeth were very important to her. Smile was beautiful. And here she is taking this drug that is making her grind her teeth. And that really distressed me. I cried when I saw she had a baby's dummy by the bed to put between her teeth so that she wouldn't grind them and that she'd protect those front teeth. But my God, what is going on here? And I could see that there was this deterioration in her.
The final straw for her friends and family came when Rachel collapsed at her friend's home.
She went to the hospital to be examined because they thought they may have been drugged and raped. So took her to the doctors, make sure everything was checked out, they were safe, blood tests. The crisis assessment team came because she wasn't well. Unfortunately, I think it was the drugs that got to her and made her paranoid.
They assessed her, took her to the hospital, got her into rehab to dry her out, and July she was back here with us, with her sisters and myself, and in a safe place.
Despite returning home, the temptations of her other life were proving too much for Rachel.
She had a party one night, a couple of friends round, and the girls were here and they had come out to stay for a couple of nights, and they were getting noisy. The point is to keep her away from any drugs, and there wasn't supposed to be any drugs, so I asked them to leave. Anyway, Rachel took it as an opportunity to go and take the girls and go off to this other place that she had been organising for them to live at.
When she was leaving, she was distressed, and I was quite distressed too. She just felt, I think, stifled, living under her mother's roof again. I remember saying to her that you're being looked after here, that it had been a positive thing that she was here. But I think she felt guilty. And the last words she ever said to me in person were, "If I leave tonight, will you still love me tomorrow?" And I started to cry and said, "Of course I will." I felt like I had only just gotten my big sister back for the first time in quite a while. And to have her leave that night, I was filled with dread. I knew that nothing good could come of it.
What her family couldn't have known was that it would be the last time they would see Rachel alive.
Human remains have washed up on a beach southeast of Melbourne. The gruesome discovery was made by a man jogging along Ventnor Beach on Phillip Island.
In August 2009, the friends and family of Rachel Betts were becoming increasingly worried for her welfare. The 27-year-old childcare worker had, in the last few months, been involved with both drug abuse and dealing, and her loved ones were growing concerned.
I rang her up especially to say to her to please come home here to this house. I said to her, "I'm really worried. You're not safe there. You're safe here. Please come home," I said. They were my last words to her. Please come home.
On the 18th of August, a new story broke about a grisly discovery at a popular tourist destination.
Police are hoping missing person reports could shed some light on a gruesome find at Phillip Island, a woman's tattooed left leg. The tattoo features red and violet flowers on a twisting vine.
The revelation about the tattooed leg set off alarm bells for Sandra. Holding on to the slender hope that her daughter was alive and well, she began frantically calling Rachel's friends.
I phoned Epping and asked the girls, "Where's Rachel? And have you heard from her? Have you spoken to her?" And the youngest one lied to me and said, "Oh, yes, I heard from her about lunchtime, and this isn't right." And so I said, "Put the other girl on the phone." And she said, "Oh no, I haven't seen her for days, and we've been calling and she's not answering." And this was just totally out of character. If Rachel was doing something, those girls would know exactly where she was going, exactly when she'd be back, how to contact her while she was away.
Rachel had disappeared, and we didn't know where she was, and Sandra was getting very frantic. She'd started placing calls to friends and family and sent text out to everybody that she thought Rachel knew.
Her mother called me up one day and messaged me, so 12 at night time, midnight, and I've gone, "Who's messaging me at midnight?" And I found out it was a clear call with Sandra, Rachel's mum. "Have you seen Rachel?" So I called up and said, "This is David." "No, I haven't seen her for 2 months. She's supposed to be in rehab." And that's when she told me about the foot they found on the beach, where the tattoo same as Rachel's. So there started the course to worry that Rachel may have died or something may have happened to her.
At the location of the grim discovery on Phillip Island, detectives were beginning to arrive at the beach that was now a crime scene.
I was afternoon on call on Sunday, the 16th of August 2009. I was contacted by Detective Sergeant Sean Audley, and he advised that a leg had been found at New Haven Beach, Phillip Island. It was a female leg, a full female leg. It had been severed around the hip joint. But it appeared that I guess it would be a non-survivable incident that had occurred, so expected foul play pretty much straight away. There was a floral tattoo on the foot, and it gave us something at least to go and start checking our records to see if there were missing persons, firstly, and there's various databases of people with tattoos. They were looked at in the following days, and we weren't really getting anywhere with that. That came to nothing.
Rain got onto the computer and looked up some photos on Facebook, and she saw a photo of Rachel dancing barefoot, and it was definitely the left foot that had the tattoo on it. And that's when I phoned the police and said, look, I think that this is my daughter.
DNA testing conclusively proved Sandra's worst fears. The leg did indeed belong to her daughter. 3 weeks later, further remains were found on another beach, followed by reports of a right leg sighted by the crew of a ferry. Tragically, the rest of Rachel's body was never recovered. Now they had identified the victim, police began to investigate Rachel's background for clues as to what had led to her tragic death. It wasn't long until her associations with the world of illegal drugs came to light.
She was working in childcare till about end of 2008, and after that point in time, 2009, it appears that that's when the drug dealing took off.
Rachel had been given the impression that she could make easy money quickly. It meant for Rachel that she could get that bigger house, have that money for the rent and bond to move herself, the girls, they'd have their own room. It wasn't for a lavish lifestyle, it was so that Rachel felt that she could provide for them. It just didn't work out that way for her.
Rachel's mother, Sandra, was aware that her daughter was mixing with nefarious characters, and one name in particular was causing her great concern. 54-year-old parolee, John Leslie Kums.
I had conversations with her about John Kums and said, this man sounds really wrong to me. And she said, well, he's got a criminal history. I said, well, you've got to avoid this person. This is not good.
A search of Rachel's home in Epping was also making detectives suspicious about John Kums.
There were various diaries that mentioned various people that she knew, lots of phone numbers. Also, some drug dealing type of equations were in these things as well. There's a reference to being scared of a JC, whom we believe to be John Kums. But the more digging we did, I suppose speaking to friends of Rachel, we realised that John Kums was her boss in relation to drug dealing. And we also spoke to one person who said that Rachel told them that she was going fishing with her boss, and she was looking forward to it. Going fishing seemed to be code for going away and dealing in drugs or drug type of trip. And those closest to her knew that's what the terminology meant. And we also go through the list of names of people that she knew, and obviously John Kums stood out because of his prior criminal history. Rachel's family, they knew obviously how close Rachel was with these girls in her care, and they found it very hard to believe that these girls didn't know where Rachel had gone on that Tuesday evening. These girls were very fearful. They were told by Rachel that she was gone and she'd be on a fishing trip for 48 hours at the latest sort of thing. So after that period of time, they became increasingly concerned. They did know that she went away with John Kums, but they were terrified to speak with us about it. They thought the best course of action was to keep it to themselves. I think they got a bit of an idea that we were on the right track with Mr. Kums anyway. I dealt with the two girls fairly regularly over that first 2 months. I ended up taking about half a dozen statements from the youngest one, who was probably closest to Rachel. And she took a while to warm to us as well, because all she'd really known, I suppose, was she'd seen Rachel drug trafficking, and I guess police were the enemy if you're out there drug trafficking. And after a while, she decided that it was okay to divulge what she did know, and she knew a lot.
With the help of the young girl, detectives were able to trace Rachel's last movements. On the 10th of August, 6 days before her remains were found, Rachel drove the 20 minutes from Epping to Heidelberg, where she left her car, and was allegedly picked up at some nearby shops by John Kums. The last time anyone was in contact with Rachel was 6:30 that night, when she spoke to her friend Deanne on the phone. The call betrayed none of the imminent danger Rachel was in.
She'd said to me she was going fishing. She'd be back, and I said, well, because we'd planned to meet up on the Monday. And she said, no, I'll be fine, I'll be back. And I said, seemed happy and to be doing whatever it may be she was doing. It sounded to me like she was jumping in a car. She didn't seem scared. To my understanding, when Rachel was talking, she was happy about wherever she was going. So at no point did she sound threatened or anything like that. I don't believe Rachel thought that she wasn't coming back.
When questioned by police, Kums provided a seemingly solid alibi to explain his movements at the time of Rachel's disappearance. His associates corroborated his story. However, using mobile phone tracking and other techniques, detectives were quick to cast doubt on his version of events. As their suspicions grew, and in order to establish the facts, the decision was made to arrest John Kums. Also arrested were his associates, Kums' 54-year-old partner Maureen Renwick, another acquaintance Nicole Godfrey, and friend Ryan Buscema.
We believe we had sufficient evidence to arrest him and to charge him with the murder of Rachel Betts, but also the other people that we arrested at the time too, as in Maureen Renwick, Ryan Buscema and Nicole Godfrey. So it was a coordinated arrest of all of those people to get their version of events at the same time. So once we arrested him, we placed him in the vehicle, and Lee Smith said to him the hardest part, saying it. And he said, yeah, I know. She pushed my buttons, and he said, I killed her. She made me fucking angry. She taunted me. That's what he said.
Police now had Rachel's alleged killer in custody. They now had to determine exactly what had happened to her. With the suspected murderer of Rachel Betts in custody, the dark, chilling past of John Leslie Kums began to emerge. In the first of a series of interviews with the alleged killer, the detective's first task was to try and establish from Kums exactly how Rachel had met her tragic and untimely death.
No one really knows exactly what happened to Rachel. We've got Mr. Kums' version of events as to when I interviewed him. He said that they drove down there together to Phillip Island, to 3 Terry Crescent, Wimbledon Heights, Nicole Godfrey's house, and that they arrived there after midnight, and that Nicole Godfrey had a cup of coffee or a cup of tea with the two of them. Mr. Kums says that after they had their coffee or whatever, Rachel went and lay in one of the rooms on the bed.
Detectives were stunned when, in an effort to explain what had happened to her, Kums claimed that Rachel was implicated in the abuse of the 2 girls she was caring for.
Mr. Kums claimed that Rachel let him know that she'd allowed for the girls to be sexually assaulted, and that she made money out of it because the girls got to pay her debts. And Kums claimed that infuriated him, and he decided to put her in a sleeper hold and strangle her. I said, well, how did you do it? And he showed with arm movements as to what he did in relation to strangling Rachel.
Kums went on to describe how he mutilated Rachel's body.
He said that she deserved to die, didn't deserve to go to leave this earth as a woman. So he says he's stabbed her repeatedly in the breast region, and we believe that was after she'd died. You had to look at it as if this was a side of beef. That's how he kind of described it. It was something where the life had gone. It's a piece of meat that he had to just make the cuts, separate the joints, treat it like that. That's how he referred to it. He did that when I interviewed him. He explained it that way, and he also explained it the same way to Maureen Renwick in a prison phone call. He said they had to make something bigger smaller, pretty horrendous.
Another chilling version of events came from Nicole Godfrey, Kums' acquaintance, who was present in the house on the supposed night of Rachel's murder.
She talked about limbs popping and things like that she could hear, and that at one stage he asked her whether she'd like to come in and see a dissection. So she was certainly present whilst this was going on in her bathroom, and it was quite a small 3-bedroom house down there.
Despite the detail and the description, detectives questioned the veracity of Kums' version of events.
At one point, he did talk to Maureen on the phone about it, and he said something about the manner of death, and it was like one click. It was the cleanest kill ever. So you hear that and you say to yourself, well, what is that then? Is that a strangulation? Is that breaking of the neck? Or what is that? You know, it could be I don't know.
In my mind, I saw him cutting out her tattoos on her abdomen. He also cut her breasts off. And again, we've got all kinds of stories. Oh, he used 5 different knives. Oh no, he used a box cutter that you keep cutting the thing.
It's hard to believe a word that comes out of Mr. Kums' mouth. It's very difficult to know when it was that she was actually killed. There was no forensic evidence, but they did clean with bleach-based cleaning products.
God knows what he really did, or even definitely where he did it, because no DNA was recovered from the bathroom where she was supposed to have been cut up.
It came as no surprise to Sandra Betts when John Leslie Kums was charged with her daughter's murder in November 2009.
When the police asked us who did we think it would likely to be, we said John Kums, because we knew he had some kind of criminal history, and at the time that was all I knew. I now know a great deal more about him.
There was a lot of police reports, a lot of coronial reports that we had to go through to look at Kums' past, and it's a very dark past. We were told that Kums had 2 previous convictions, and 2 major previous convictions where he'd killed 2 people.
He killed a fellow by the name of Michael Sperani in February 1984.
Michael Sperani lived in the seaside town of Mount Martha. In 1984, he was selling his car, and his potential purchaser was one John Leslie Kums. On the pretense of confirming whether the car could tow a boat, Kums hitched up a trailer and then offered Michael the chance to accompany him on a trip out to sea.
John Kums enticed Michael Sperani to come out for a ride on the boat.
It transpired that Sperani was dating one of Kums' friends, a relationship that his friend disapproved of. Kums seemingly had thought of a solution to this problem.
It appears he was assaulted on the boat, and then he was stabbed by Kums. He was thrown out into the water, and Kums then ran over him with the boat's propeller, and then after a while went up to him and pulled him up slightly, and then stabbed him some more. And Kums made a comment to his wife at the time, when he later relayed what happened, and said that he stabbed him a little bit so the fish could finish him off.
"44-year-old Henry Desmond Kells was asleep in his Edith Vale home when he was attacked in the early hours of the 17th of November, 1984.
Another good friend of his by the name of Opie, it appears that Kells was socialising with Opie's landlady, and this upset Opie, and Opie complained to Kums about it, and Kums thought he'd go and fix that problem as well.
Broke into the bungalow knowing he would be asleep and drunk, and attacked him in a really vicious way. He pinned him down. There were bruises on Kells' feet and knees.
There's evidence that he's punching and that sort of thing, and then Kums went to the kitchen, got a knife, and stabbed him and killed him, and also mutilated his genitalia We believe it's probably, to try and give the impression that there'd been some sort of sexual transgression and maybe revenge had taken place, something like that, which seems to be another theme with Mr Kums as well. He seems to blame sexual misbehaviour, or he alleges sexual misbehaviour on behalf of victims. And he did that on that occasion with Sperani, and I believe he was probably trying to give the same impression in relation to what happened with Desmond Kells as well.
In 1985, Kums was convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment for the murder of Henry Desmond Kells. He was granted an 11-year minimum term on appeal. At his parole hearing, the board was told that Kums did not pose a substantial threat to the community. What they weren't aware of, though, was that he had murdered Michael Sperani 8 months before killing Kells and had got away with it. Satisfied he was safe to release, Kums left prison in October 1996. Within 3 months of being paroled, Kums was arrested again and convicted of Sperani's murder. Despite being now responsible for the deaths of 2 men, but supposedly rehabilitated, he was handed a minimum term of just 10 years. By 2007, Kums was released on parole back into the community, where he started a relationship with Maureen Renwick and began dealing drugs. Just 2 years after his release, while still on parole, Rachel would be dead.
And he did try and present as the jovial, grandfatherly type figure. He was quite cunning and devious the way he operated.
To look at him, you wouldn't think he was dangerous to that extent. I'd met him twice. My first reaction to him was, well, why are you hanging out with someone that's that age?
This guy is a master manipulator. He had people wrapped around his little fingers, and he cultivated a facade. There was this nice, jolly, plump guy who would never harm a fly.
While Rachel's loved ones tried to comprehend Kums' dangerous past and began to ask questions of a justice system that let a killer out onto the streets not once, but twice, detectives were preparing to go to trial. In 2011, John Leslie Kums was about to appear in court, charged with the murder of Rachel Betts. For his victim's family, the trauma and devastation of the past 2 years was about to be played out in public.
John Leslie Kums will face the Melbourne Magistrates Court for allegedly strangling the 27-year-old and throwing her off a pier on Phillip Island.
First, you have the committal in the Magistrates Court, where they test to see whether the proceedings will be successful in the Supreme Court. It means that Kums was able to introduce things in the Magistrates Court, claims about Rachel which were untrue.
The committal process, the media report all the things that a bit sensational and made Rachel look to be a drug-using, drug-selling woman. The worst parts, I suppose, that came out from the witnesses, that was what was reported.
He claimed that Rachel had set these girls up for sex acts, for money and all this rubbish, and the girls were interviewed in the court and they said, no, that didn't happen, Rachel would never do that to us, etc. But he did succeed in besmirching her name, which was what he wanted to do. He got this rubbish into the press.
He said that Rachel said that if he played his cards right, she could have his way with the little one, as in the young girl, the younger of the 2 girls. When I interviewed about that and told him that he didn't say that previously to me, he goes, oh, I did. Well, he didn't. We went back and checked the transcripts from the interview and he never did.
To me, it was just another excuse to paint what he'd done in a better light, like as if he was doing society a favour by what he'd done.
I don't believe that she exposed those girls to or encouraged any sort of interference of them, allowed it to happen. There's no evidence at all to suggest that, apart from what comes out of Kums' mouth, which cannot be believed at all.
Little could prepare Rachel's family for the emotional torment of being exposed to the baseless allegations about their sister, peddled by John Kums.
We had to put up with a lot of lies being told about Rachel in the media, and we weren't really allowed to say anything back or do anything back, which was very hard for a long time.
I never realised how much the journalists themselves are able to pick and choose interesting or sort of headline-grabbing elements of any given case and put it together in their own way. Because the way that cases like these are portrayed to the public have a really quite a large influence on how the public then see the victim or see the perpetrator.
The way victims and their relatives are treated in court was a shock to the Betts family, and something they have been inspired to try and change.
That's an issue I'm raising at the moment, along with the issue of having your own barrister in court to represent the victim's interests specifically as a third party. And I think that that's something that happens in a lot of countries around the world, and it needs to be looked at here. We need the pendulum to shift a bit the other way. At the moment, the victim doesn't have equal rights to the accused, and the right to counsel, I think, is a very important one.
After the committal, we were booked off for trial, so organised all the witnesses, and then on day one of the trial, he decided to plead guilty.
On the 26th of August 2011, John Leslie Kums was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility for parole for the murder of Rachel Betts. The judge ordered that his sentence would be served cumulatively with his existing term for the Sperani murder. In passing sentence, the judge described Kums as someone with a frightening predilection for murder.
I think the thing that stuck out the most was on the day of sentencing, when he was in court and they read out the sentence and he was being led from the dock out the side door, and he gave the finger up, known as the bird, to the courtroom on the way out, as if to say, well, I don't really care.
He stuck his finger up at him. Like, screw you, I killed your daughter and I'm still alive. Like, he's a monster who doesn't deserve to be alive.
It's really hard to say what justice is, isn't it? We got the best outcome that could be created in the circumstances. We got a judge who saw through all the lies and the stories and the accusations that Kums made, and who saw that this is a person who had to get a life sentence with no minimum, and he really saw it clearly for what it was, because he didn't make them concurrent. He made consecutive life sentences. It will be life followed by life, and no minimum set.
As a way of coping with the loss of her daughter, Sandra Betts has fought for a more rigorous examination of the parole system, something that is a cornerstone of the Australian legal process.
Parole is a system that enables the gradual supervised release of people from prison into the community. So typically when someone is sentenced to a term of imprisonment, they will get a minimum sentence and a maximum sentence. And what determines when they're released after serving that minimum sentence is a decision by the parole authority, the parole board, and they have to decide, is it appropriate for that person to be released?
Well, the parole system was so broken. Kums was recommended for parole on the basis that he was assessed as a low risk, a double murderer. I wouldn't have thought that that could be possible given the sentence he had. But because he was assessed as low risk and the parole board didn't question this, he was assigned to a junior corrections person. He wasn't monitored very much. So there weren't the checks, the cross-checking on what he's saying is true or not true, and what he's doing is what he says he's doing, what accommodation is the appropriate accommodation.
What we have seen in Victoria most recently is some very serious failures that have shone a light on the parole system, and that's been a good thing. It shouldn't have taken those horrific crimes for this kind of reform to happen. There's been a substantial increase in the parole board's budget. There's been improvements in the quality of information that is being presented to the parole board to enable it to make proper decisions around managing the risk to the community. We saw something like 10,000 decisions being made every year with only a few minutes for the parole board to consider each one of those decisions. When you consider the potential risks involved and the importance around those decisions, it really was an unsustainable practice that we had. That's now changing, and that's a positive thing.
The death of Rachel Betts and other high-profile murders has made the Australian justice system question itself and its processes. But despite the improvements that have and continue to be made, it is little comfort for Rachel's friends and family, who still have to live their lives without her.
The grief that comes with the sort of experience where your daughter is murdered is really intense and invasive, and it pervades daily life. Most mornings I will wake up with some thoughts of Rachel, and it's 6 years down the track. And there's always the important times, that her birthday, she'd be 33 now. It's awful. And I know it's not just me that's affected, my children have been very affected.
I miss my confidant. I miss the support, the unconditional support. I was looking forward to her teaching me how to drive and being there when I graduated high school. I have a sense of what she's lost as well, though, is what I've lost. I've lost my sister, my hero, but she's lost the potential of a full life.
It makes me really both angry and sad that she didn't get to see me become an adult myself, and then to be able to have that relationship with her on a different level, and like every new step I take in life, she doesn't get to know about that or to see that. And you see me become someone that we probably could have been even closer now than we were before. And I'm also kind of irrationally scared of overtaking her age. To become older than my older sister is really strange but scary to me.
I dread time moving forward. I remember dates and numbers, anniversaries, and I feel more hopeless and frustrated that every year goes by is another year further away from what happened.
These days, Australia is sadly no stranger to gun violence. But back in 1987, the idea of a gunman on the loose targeting random passers-by with a military assault weapon was unthinkable. In just 40 minutes of carnage, a city would lose its innocence.
This is Melbourne, a peaceful town, peaceful city, and all of a sudden, bullets are whizzing past.
A rampaging gunman would take the lives of 7 innocent people and leave dozens more wounded.
What's going on here? This is not Melbourne. This was a war zone.
In a unique insight, the gunman would live to describe his actions in chilling detail.
I shot him about here and he swerved over to where he is now, and the bike dropped and he started screaming out, so I let another 2 rounds into him.
We had the opportunity to interview a mass murderer. He wanted to tell his story, so we tried to find out as much as we could about him and about why he did what he did.
The Hoddle Street Massacre was a crime that shook Australia. This street in Clifton Hill, less than 5 kilometres from the heart of Melbourne, couldn't be more ordinary. Yet on the evening of the 9th of August 1987, a crime would unfold here that would mean its name would be forever remembered. This is Hoddle Street, and on that night, it resembled a war zone.
Hoddle Street in Clifton Hill is a major road in Melbourne. It basically connects the north and the south parts, and thousands of cars go past there every day of the week. There are train lines that go down virtually following Hoddle Street, and they carry thousands of people every day.
Crime-wise, look, like a lot of the inner city suburbs, Clifton Hill had more than their share of house breakings, burglaries, that sort of thing. But it was a pretty good suburb and still is.
It's only a short distance from the inner city area. Certainly Clifton Hill was never noted for a high crime, from my memory of the area. More of a sleepy hollow than anything.
On the evening of the 9th of August 1987, that tranquility would be shattered by an act of unspeakable and unfathomable violence. Chef Andrew Hack was heading out for an evening shift at the restaurant where he worked.
I was driving down Heidelberg Road, heading towards Clifton Hill, towards the city, and got towards Clifton Hill Station, and I took a left turn down onto Hoddle Street. Normally I would go straight over the overpass there. As I was driving down the ramp, I remember seeing a police car further down the road with sort of flashing lights, not thinking anything of it, just driving along, and the music was quite loud, listening to that.
Railway signalman Wayne Monaghan was also preparing for a long evening shift in the signal box that was located next to Clifton Hill railway station.
Before I got to work, I got Kentucky Fried Chicken, and there was no microwaves in those days, or cookers or anything like that. So put the Kentucky Fried Chicken under the food warmer, then heard noises, gunshots, went back in the signal box. I rang the signalman at A box, he wouldn't answer the phone. I rang Metrol, which was the train control centre. They didn't know what was going on, I just said, I'm getting out of here.
Wayne left his signal box situated next to Hoddle Street and the unfolding chaos. He took cover nearby and waited for the police to arrive.
I remember seeing a car with sparks. Something had fallen off the car, looked like something had fell off from underneath the car onto the road. And I didn't think anything of that. Just kept driving. And I flattened out on Hoddle Street there, and then I just heard this almighty bang. And I remember looking at myself and my shirt, and there was just blood all over my shirt. My body was numb, pins and needles feeling.
Andrew Hack had unwittingly driven into what was to become one of Australia's most shocking crimes. It was just after 9:30 p.m, and someone was firing randomly at cars on Hoddle Street. By then, at least 2 people were already dead and countless wounded. 24-year-old Vesna Markovska had been shot multiple times when she got out of her car after it had been hit by one of the gunman's first shots. She was a broadcaster and theatre performer. She had spent that weekend celebrating her father's birthday. Moments later, 27-year-old Englishman Robert Mitchell was shot in the head as he tried to help Vesna. He had only moved to Australia the previous year and worked as the state manager for a stationery company. Lying nearby, Gina Papayannou was critically injured after being shot in the side. Gina was in her final year as an art student at Monash University and hoped to be a lawyer in the future.
I was down with one of my crew doing some work in St Kilda, and I heard some commotion on the radio in the police car. And Clifton Hill at that stage was probably 6 or 7 kilometres from our location. They knew, because my call sign, that I'd held the rank of sergeant. They asked for me to attend at the scene at that time. The basic information was that there was a man randomly shooting at vehicles.
As drivers approached the gunman, hidden in undergrowth, they came under fire. In the chaos, many thought their cars had been hit by stones thrown up by other vehicles. They were tragically wrong. Over 100 rounds of ammunition would be fired at innocent people that night.
He was, to a certain extent, like the hunter with a spotlight on a rabbit. He just picked off whoever came in his sights. This is Melbourne, a peaceful town, peaceful city, and all of a sudden, bullets are whizzing past. These bullets in cars, and these cars reversing into other cars, and people under extreme shock.
As vehicles and passengers were hit, in a killing zone of less than 400 metres, several people were wounded by flying glass and shrapnel, but were able to drive to safety.
Started getting some feeling in my fingers and all that. And then I looked out the side, out of the car onto the footpath, and I noticed two people laying on the side of the road, not knowing what had happened. They were slumped over each other, and I opened my door and I thought I wanted to go and see what was wrong. And at this stage I still didn't know that I'd been shot. And I walked to the front of my car, which is probably about 5 metres to the front of my car, and then I heard another noise, another bang. And it was quite loud, it was deafening. And then that's when I realised that someone was actually shooting. So I sort of panicked a bit, got back into my car, started to drive. I put my hand down to my side, and I remember putting my hand in a hole in the side of my back.
Despite life-threatening injuries, Andrew fled the scene and managed to get help at a nearby restaurant. Back on Hoddle Street, the gunman had claimed more lives. 53-year-old brewery worker Dusan Flajnik was killed as he drove into gunfire. His car was struck by 2 bullets, one of which lodged in his chest. He bled to death alone in his car, with his family learning of his death only after seeing television footage of the scene. Seconds later, John Muscat, a Clifton Hill local, left a friend's house nearby after hearing gunfire and going to investigate. He was shot multiple times as he crossed Hoddle Street, hit in the arms, chest and head. In the midst of the chaos, police officers were beginning to arrive.
A number of police cars stopped in and around Hoddle Street, around Ramsden Street where the railway station is. The only thing that was apparent was that someone was taking shots at vehicles or people, and no one knew where the location of that person was, how many people were involved, what the situation was. It was just, no one knew. There was no answer. You could hear the shots, you didn't know where they were coming from. You knew at that stage a number of people had already been shot. You could see some carnage on Hoddle Street.
We'd had a very quiet night up to that point, but there was a man with a gun in Hoddle Street shooting, and they wanted us to get overhead and see what we could do. So we responded as quickly as we could, got the aircraft out, started up and flew down over the area.
The police did not know how many people were there. The police did not know really where the shots were coming from. One moment they thought the shots were up near the signal box near Ramsden Street and Hoddle Street. The next minute the shots closer to the railway station. So there was a great deal of confusion, and the police that were there, generally speaking, had never confronted a scene like that in their working life.
What's going on here? This is not Melbourne. This was a war zone. This was something that, it was spooky. It was very spooky. The only noise you heard was the occasional wailing of a police siren or the shots being fired by this lunatic.
Tragically, a number of those shots were aimed at another car travelling on Hoddle Street that night. The Skinner family were returning from a birthday party when their car came under fire. 23-year-old mother Tracy was sitting in the passenger seat, holding her son on her lap, when their vehicle was hit by several bullets. As she placed her child in the relative safety of the footwell, she was shot in the head and died instantly. Incredibly, her husband drove the car to a nearby petrol station and safety. Their 18-month-old son survived. Moments later, 22-year-old postal worker Shane Stanton, riding his motorbike along Hoddle Street, was caught in a hail of gunfire. He was riding to work, but ironically was unaware he was on a rostered day off and not due in until the following night.
Well, I think my first recollection was actually seeing the motorbike laying on its side in the middle of Hoddle Street, and then a couple of cars parked at various spots on Hoddle Street. Now, what drew my attention as we were looking and listening to these shots going off, hearing all of the radio transmission, which was non-stop, the helicopter above, up in the distance, I saw what I thought was someone certainly lying on the ground or in the gutter, waving an arm.
The figure desperately signalling to the police was Gina Papayannou. She'd been lying on the road in urgent need of medical attention for over 20 minutes.
There was a set of headlights on a motorcar that was stopped, so I could see the silhouette of this movement as a result of the headlights on that car. So I said, there's someone up there, and you could see them moving. So 4 of us jumped in the car. We didn't have bulletproof vests or anything in those days, so we drove up there with our heads under the dashboard. And for some reason, we just felt that the shots were coming from the railway station area. So we parked across the front of where this young female was lying to afford us a bit of protection, as well as her, who was conscious, and I've said this to a lot of people, her injuries were best described as being attacked by a shark. Virtually half the side of the body was just an open, massive wound. We had nothing that we could support her with as far as first aid. There was nothing we could do other than just, I guess, hold her hand and talk to her and comfort her.
As soon as it was deemed safe, paramedics rushed to Gina's aid.
There was one young girl there who had been shot but still alive, and so we treated her, and she was a lovely lady and was even considering the horrific things that had happened to her. We treated her, loaded her into the ambulance, and the police officer drove us to the hospital.
Gina's family maintained around-the-clock vigil for their daughter and sister, but despite doctors' best efforts, she would lose her fight for life in hospital 11 days later. She was only 21 and was mortally wounded trying to help others caught up in the massacre. Back on Hoddle Street, the random shooting continued. However, as more police officers arrived at the scene, it was apparent that they themselves had become the target. In August 1987, a gunman went on a violent rampage that left a trail of dead and wounded in his wake. As emergency services tried to deal with the situation, the net was already closing in on the perpetrator.
The shooting was still going on spasmodically. It wasn't every 1 or 2 minutes. It'd be periods of no gun sound at all. One stage, the helicopter got hit with one of the rounds.
I believe he fired 3 shots, but one hit the aircraft, and incredibly it was right below where I was sitting. The shockwave that went through my feet and my legs was unbelievable. The pain was incredible. If it had been sort of 0.5 millimetre forward, it would have actually split the fuel bladder and caused sparking with all the wires, so all the electrical stuff. So could have been interesting.
Narrowly avoiding a huge explosion, the crew managed to safely land the helicopter in a nearby field. Back on Hoddle Street, and as police began to take control of the scene, the shooting was growing more sporadic, and it was apparent the gunman was on the move.
He was able to observe from the bushes and the trees that were along the creek line, the Merry Creek, generally speaking where the police were, and any other obstacles. And he followed it, and he eventually came out into the street.
There was a police officer there directing traffic, shot at the police officer. Now that police officer was not injured because the bullet actually went through his jacket, burnt his shirt and put a mark on his skin.
One of the police who were on duty happened to see a figure dart in the distance. They chased after him, and the next moment they are under gunfire themselves.
He took refuge behind a brick wall and shot at the police officers in the police car. That's when he ran out of ammunition, and the police officers who were shot at called on him to drop his gun. He did that after he'd finished shooting and gave himself up.
The offender, who was behind a bluestone wall, if I remember correctly, threw his arms up in the air, screaming out, "Don't shoot, don't shoot," and the police then arrested him and handcuffed him.
This ignominious act brought to an end one of the most brutal crimes Australia had ever witnessed. Confronted with a normal suburban street that was now littered with bodies and abandoned vehicles, police had to determine who exactly this man was and why he would destroy so many innocent lives for no apparent reason. In a move that confounded detectives, the suspect now in custody was more than happy to talk.
We were told that at least one person had been shooting at cars in Hoddle Street, and that there were a number of people who were dead. We still didn't know for sure how many, and that there were many others injured. Beyond that, that was probably all we had.
The offender in question, currently sitting quietly in an interview room at St Kilda Road Police Station, was a 19-year-old disgraced Army officer cadet called Julian Knight. And what's more, he was willing to tell detectives exactly what he had done.
It was fascinating to interview in this circumstance where the person wanted to tell the story, couldn't wait to tell the story. It was sort of clinical, almost military, the way he was debriefing. And it felt like he was excited to tell the story. Look what I did. I did this, I did this, I did this. And it was sort of interesting and on reflection, a bit scary.
To the amazement of the police, during several interviews lasting almost 12 hours, Julian Knight took the detectives step by step through his nefarious actions that evening, and even explained his reasons for carrying out the attack.
We had the opportunity to interview a mass murderer. He wanted to tell his story, so we tried to find out as much as we could about him and about why he did what he did.
Just sights, target, bang.
Prior to the shooting, he had troubles with his Tirana motor car. He was having trouble changing gears. A former girlfriend was having a party, and he wasn't invited to the party, which upset him. He went to the local hotel nearby, and he had some beer there with one or two other people. And according to them, he didn't drink a great deal. He chatted up the barmaid and made reference to the fact that she had a scar on her face, and he commented that he's got lots of scars on his body, and then went back to his home.
He went to his bedroom, he retrieved his guns. He had 3 weapons, a .22 rifle, a shotgun and a high-powered military rifle. He pulled them out, he got his gun belts, his ammunition, loaded up magazines.
You could argue that the shotgun and the .22 could be used for hunting rabbits, foxes, but the M14, it's designed purely and simply for military purposes, to kill another human being.
He then stepped us through how he went out of his home, across the road, which is adjacent, parallel to the railway line, crossed the railway line onto a little reserve beside the railway track, and that abutted on Hoddle Street. A spot where you had a good view north and south of the traffic. It's quite a wide street, pretty well lit. He then told us how he started shooting at the people in the cars. So picking them off as they drove along with the intent to kill. I mean, we took him to that point in our questioning, why we were shooting at the cars or the people. He said he was shooting at the people. Why were you shooting at the people? I was shooting at them to kill them. Very clear about that.
By shooting at them, was it your intention to kill them?
Yeah.
The people in the car?
This chilling admission was just the first insight into the mind of Julian Knight.
He talked about the idea of wanting to know what it was like to shoot someone. I wanted to know what it was like to kill someone. I wanted to be involved in a theatre of war. I wanted to be involved in combat. These are things that he said. However, when the time came, when the police called on him, he actually did give up then.
Was it your intent to shoot the policemen, to kill them?
No.
What was your intent when you were firing at them?
No, I thought they'd shoot back. I wanted SAG to come because I didn't particularly want to, lie bleeding in the gutter with a 38 slug in my heart. Coughing blood. I preferred SAG to take my head right off.
There's nothing brave about the man at all, because he was shooting at people in their cars who were unarmed and didn't even know he was there. We saw nothing at all in his demeanour in terms of regret or remorse. Nothing. The nearest thing to that was when the newspapers arrived, and they were starting to put the stories very quickly into the newspapers, and we showed him a newspaper and he looked at it and he got angry because they had some of the facts wrong. But he said something like, "No, this is bullshit, they've got this all wrong." That said a fair bit that this was all about him. Immature, self-obsessed, by no means psychotic, not at all. He was very clear-eyed, very clear-minded, just a very nasty person.
As detectives pressed on, determined to find some reason for Julian Knight's abhorrent actions on Hoddle Street, the survivors' and witnesses' personal battles were only just beginning. Melbourne and the whole of Australia was stunned by the massacre on Hoddle Street on the 9th of August 1987. As detectives tried to determine the reasons for the attack, survivors and emergency crews faced their own ordeal: how to cope with what they'd witnessed.
I was approached by various people in the community and their solicitors who wanted to refer survivors of Hoddle Street, that is people that had witnessed the shooting, people that had been shot and survived, for treatment. To a person, they were suffering elements of post-traumatic stress disorder. Some were experiencing major grief. They were depressed, they were having nightmares, generically, flashbacks. And of course, this was front-page news for a very long time, so it wouldn't go away in their consciousness because every day they'd read more about Knight and all the rest of it.
Unfortunately for some, the awful events that they had experienced and the way they were treated in the immediate aftermath would have lasting effects.
They took me down to Fitzroy North Police Station and done a statement there, and they let us go. We had no way of getting back because I asked the policeman, how are we going to get back to our cars? And they brought us back in a divvy van and dropped us off on the other side of where Knight shot everyone, and we had to walk past the whole lot, all the bodies, the whole lot, with another policeman. So you could still see all the people in the cars and lying on the ground and all that.
I was a young fella, 19 years old. To be honest with you, a little bit of, once I got better, a little bit of media attention, I sort of enjoyed it. I thought, but deep down inside, I was suffering. I just hated myself and I didn't want to go on. I did take up drinking very seriously because I didn't worry about life anymore, didn't worry about dying anymore.
As well as the civilians caught up in the tragedy, first responders too were severely affected.
At that stage, there was never any real emphasis on either psychological or operational debriefing. And so, as it turned out, because there was a need for work to be done afterwards, we probably had about 20 minutes to clean up and sort of get ourselves together a little bit at the hospital, and we got a call to go to an asthmatic patient, 5 minutes away.
It was something that the police here hadn't experienced, to my knowledge, before August 1987. The tactics and the response teams that the police now have compared to 20 odd years ago have changed dramatically. So I think they'd be certainly more prepared or well prepared. But how do you prepare for a lunatic who walks out on the street with a gun and starts shooting blatantly at anything that moves? I don't know.
The first step in answering that question was to explore the background of Julian Knight, to try and piece together the events in his life that led directly to the massacre on Hoddle Street.
He was an adopted child. His father was in the military. He was a captain. Linguistics, Chinese, I think, was his specialty. His mother was a delightful person. He was raised in a very loving environment. He attended a number of different high schools, and part of the reason for that was to find a school that had a cadet corps.
The young Julian Knight was obsessed with the military, and despite his father being against the idea, he successfully applied for a place at the Royal Military College at Duntroon, where he trained to be an army officer.
He was known as a person from the wrong side of the tracks, and so he would be referred to continuously in the pejorative, in a negative way, and he was bullied and bastardised. And as a disciplinary measure, he was confined to barracks on the weekend, and he saw this as another form of bullying. And there was a particular Saturday night that he went AWOL, absent without leave, and went to a local nightclub in Canberra known as the Bin, which I think still exists. And the person that he felt was bastardising him was there, and Knight stabbed him. Arising from that, and Knight was also injured in that incident, he was placed in hospital. His father then intervened as best he could, and Knight was discharged from the army awaiting a court-martial. So he went straight from that military environment back to his home at Clifton Hill, where he felt doubly disenfranchised because a lot of his old friends rejected him. They had a view about him joining the army, and the fact that it hadn't worked for him just galvanised that view, I guess. And so he was really a very disenfranchised teenager, lonely and angry, and dealing with the loss of his life project, which was to be an officer and a gentleman.
So the point in saying that about his history is, in other words, talking about why he got booted out of the military, trouble with his girlfriend, trouble with his car, had a few drinks. The point in talking about that is we wanted to cover off on those as not being the reasons that triggered a psychotic episode. And we were able to do that. And that was important, to be able to say, well, there's no psychosis here, there's no psychotic episode. He's not mad. So in lay terms, you might be describing him as crazy. In medico-legal terms, he was not. He was sane. He certainly had a personality disorder. He was sane.
I guess in common parlance, he's a person who is well-oriented in time, place and person. There's no madness there. And clearly, as the crime demonstrates, there was a lot of badness at the time.
Perpetrators of mass shootings rarely live to tell their version of events. After Hoddle Street, Knight was able to do just that, and detectives went one step further. They took him back to the scene, where, in graphic detail, the gunman relived the horror of that evening.
You had the 22 in my left hand and the shotgun in the right, and the M14 slung over my shoulder by a sling.
In circumstances where someone is talking, if we can, we want to cover off on what we have to prove. So, for example, we want to be able to prove his intention while he was shooting at the people in the car. So, explicit questions about that. Okay, so when you were shooting, what were you shooting at?
I was shooting at the people in the car.
And what was your intention in relation to them?
Kill them.
Why did you want to kill them?
I don't know.
So proving his intent to kill is an important thing. So that was important for us to take him to those questions, and his answers were important so far as proving goes.
So I didn't see them get it out. I just saw her on the road, and that's when I shot her. And then she fell back on the road, and I let off another two, and then someone else came out, and I dropped that one as well.
Right. And when you fired at them, What was your intent?
Kill him.
Why did you want to kill them?
I know.
Can I say that was really chilling. At the time, for me personally, I was in work mode. When I look back on it, I think this is a remarkable piece of an interview. So he steps us through almost. So Brian McCarthy, my senior sergeant, took the lead in the investigations and asked him questions along the way. Essentially though, he took us through another form of debrief at the scene. So he was able to show us where he was when he started, where he first started shooting, that person. In one example, he describes that he could hear the person screaming.
I shot him about here and he swerved over to where he is now and the bike dropped and he started screaming out, so I let another 2 rounds into him.
I think he used words like, I put him out of his misery. So I shot him again to kill him.
What was your intent when you shot him?
Kill him.
Do you know why you wanted to kill him?
No.
The confession is only a beginning to an investigation. And in this case, in one sense, the investigation started with the confession.
As the whole of Australia came to terms with the dreadful events on Hoddle Street, the public's thoughts turned to a trial. How would Julian Knight defend his actions in front of a jury and in the court of public opinion? In April 1988, the survivors and witnesses of the Hoddle Street massacre braced themselves for their first sight of the perpetrator as Julian Knight appeared for his committal hearing at Melbourne Magistrates Court.
We walked in, sat down, and I was maybe 2 metres, 3 metres away. He was sitting in a box, and it started. And the committal hearing, basically, the judge will read out how each person was killed. And I remember there was a young lady, Tracy Skinner, I think her name was, who was killed, and her partner was in front of me. And I remember him, when it was read out, he said, something to Knight. It was quite nasty, quite rude, which he probably deserved. But I remember Knight just turning around to him and just giving him a smirk, smirking at him as like, bad luck sort of thing or whatever. But that was pretty bad.
6 months later, survivors, witnesses and relatives of the deceased were spared the trauma of a trial when Knight pleaded guilty to 7 counts of murder and 46 counts of attempted murder.
Eventually, he agreed to, I guess we'd describe it as a plea bargain. And if he pleaded guilty, he would get a life sentence with a minimum of 27 years. And that would spare the community the trauma of a very protracted trial. It would spare the victims the trauma of having to relive the event in the witness box and be cross-examined about it.
There was a sense of relief when we learned about this, because if you think about how we might have had to run a trial and put all of those victims through a trial, families and the rest of it, that would have been horrendous. However, it was never really an option. He was pleading guilty from the start. He pleaded guilty to all the charges, and his plea, whilst it was put as well as it could have been by his counsel, was pretty lame. The prosecutor was able to paint the picture about what happened and talk about what might have been behind it in terms of saying there was no psychosis, there was no insanity. This was just a person with a bit of a personality disorder and a very immature man who chose to go out and kill people because he wanted to see what that was like.
In November 1988, Julian Knight was sentenced to a minimum of 27 years for the massacre on Hoddle Street. To many, his sentence was an insult.
The fact that after murdering 7 people, let alone the untold number of people that were injured physically or mentally, or both, that he could potentially be walking the streets of Melbourne again after 27 years was just a grave sentencing error.
It came over the news and the radio later that day and said that he'd been sentenced to life with a minimum parole period of 27 years, which back then I thought, life, you'll never get out, but I didn't know the parole sort of period. I think back then you had to give someone a parole period just to give them a bit of hope. But I remember my mum ringing me and telling me that, it's not enough, it's not enough. It should be life forever. And so that was tough. But 27 years, 28 years now is gone, and it's gone so quick. So now we hopefully we can just put it behind us and keep him in jails.
Further angering survivors and witnesses of the terrible events on Hoddle Street has been Knight's behaviour in prison.
I said to him when he was 19, pull your head in. You're a 19-year-old. If you don't create problems in the prison, there's a chance that you might get parole when you're 46. People may excuse you on the basis of your youth. But of course, Knight has remained in the public light since that time, for all the wrong reasons.
He should never be released. And the thing about what people don't realise, he's caused nothing but trouble the whole time he's been in jail. The self-appointed president of the prisoners' rights group, and he's been branded here as a pest to the court system.
That served as a constant reminder of the original atrocity that he committed, and consequently people, I think, now are angrier about him and what happened than in fact they were 27, 28 years ago, because it's been constantly reinforced that he's there and what he did and so on, and he hasn't knuckled under.
Always protesting about the rights of prisoners and the duties and his own innocence and all those sorts of things. So no, he deserves to stay until he can rot in hell, as far as I'm concerned.
I don't think he'll be released. I think the political climate has changed so dramatically since 1987. The antipathy towards him has intensified almost exponentially. Back then the city was in shock. We've had, all this time to process it, and he's been in the public eye intermittently over the past 3 decades or so.
A lot of the times it is focused on him. We need to focus a lot on the survivors and the victims and how they're coping, and we all hate it. We all hate seeing his name in the news. We need to just shut him up and just hopefully he can just never talk about it again.
In 2014, the law that refers to parole was changed, specifically relating to Julian Knight. The amendment meant he will be eligible for parole only if he is in imminent danger of dying or is seriously incapacitated, and as a result, no longer has the physical ability to harm any person.
I interviewed him in early 2015, and I was retained in past years to review him every 5 years for the parole board, but I had not seen him for quite a number of years. And for the first time ever, and I always question him about, are you sorry for this? Is there any remorse? And for the first time ever, he said he was very sorry for what he had done. I'm always sceptical about expressions of remorse. I've seen thousands of people, and I'm yet to meet somebody that doesn't express remorse. The difference is they normally express it at the moment they're caught. With this man, it's taken nearly 3 decades for him to actually say he was sorry for what happened. So I thought it was significant and in all likelihood genuine, as best I could tell. Certainly appropriate.
Despite this admission, Knight has never provided any explanation for his actions on Hoddle Street, other than his morbid desire to experience combat and killing.
I have a theory that it was really the confluence of anger, unrequited ambition, being bullied, alcohol, and access to firearms. And following Hoddle Street, I became quite vocal about the need for better arm control in this country, because I think it's arguable that had he not had access to those guns, Hoddle Street may never have happened.
We had this Hoddle Street shootings where 7 people were killed and many more injured. In Victoria, not far away, in fact in the city, we had the Queen Street shootings where quite a number of people were killed. followed later by Port Arthur. It is in another state. So for me, I've always had a profound dislike for firearms, and I see no reason at all for the legislation to provide access to high-powered military weapons for people here. I grew up in a rural area, and I absolutely understand the need for farmers to have a .22 rifle, maybe a shotgun to deal with vermin. The idea that people can have high-powered military weapons is just, for me, a complete nonsense.
Despite almost 3 decades having passed since that cold August night that claimed the lives of 7 people, the mental scars of the Hoddle Street Massacre still remain.
It has had a really profound effect on some people, and I understand that when you sort of read some of their stories. It really shocked Melbourne and brought into Melbourne some real horror, some real terror that this could happen.
And even to this day, it affects me. It does, and I don't sort of talk to it much with my family because I don't want to upset them, even though they know what I've been through, and it's it's hard. So
everyday, regular Australians going about their business, good people, all of them. And so some of them pulled up because they saw what was happening. They saw people injured, they got out to help, and they were shot. And I think every one of those is a tragedy.
It changed my life. It did. I didn't know whether I was going to die or, I survived, and I'm lucky.
In April 2012, in a quiet suburb on the western fringes of Brisbane, a 43-year-old woman went missing, leaving her husband, young children, and the whole community praying for her safe return.
Someone knew really where she was.
Trawling creeks, trawling parks, searching for any sign of her. A mother of 3 beautiful young girls does not just walk out on her kids.
The discovery of her body 10 days later revealed the secrets and lies that kept her hidden and unveiled the double life of her killer.
Impossible that she would have walked that far.
This was a very, very juicy story. Gerard had been having an affair. Everyone wanted to hear about the scandal.
The story of Gerard Baden Clay and the death of his wife Allison was a crime that shook Australia. In 2012, Allison Baden Clay, a married mother of 3 young daughters, went missing in Brisbane's western suburbs. Her husband claimed she went for a walk and never came home. What would unfold over the course of the next few months would shock the town and the entire nation to the core.
I moved to Brookfield around about 1992, 93 because it was a semi-rural community. I thought it was a good place to bring up children.
It's 15-20 minutes from the CBD. They say you could have country lifestyle, city convenience. Beautiful surroundings, beautiful community, lovely school, showgrounds, pony club, general store. It had everything. Ticked all the boxes for where you'd want to raise a family.
It's a very safe family area, a lot of money out that way. So crime in Brisbane does not usually happen out there.
Very little crime. Very little crime at all.
Police emergency, what's your location?
Good morning, Brookfield.
And what's happening there?
My wife isn't home. I don't know where she is.
What's your name, first of all?
I'm sorry. Jared.
And your last name, Jared?
Baden, Clay.
And what's your wife's name?
Allison with 2 L's.
In the early hours of Friday the 20th of April 2012, Jared Baden Clay, a local real estate agent from Brookfield, reported his wife Allison missing. Police were quick to respond and word began to spread about the disappearance.
A friend from Brisbane phoned up and knew the real estate connection and said, you know, Allison Baden Clay's gone missing, and I was just in shock.
He was this beautiful Allison Baden Clay, this mum with 3 beautiful young girls, and they were a well-known family in the community.
People don't generally go missing in Brookfield, so it was a surprise.
It was treated like just any other missing person, perhaps, you know, a mum who'd gone off for a walk.
I don't want to be alarmist. I tried the 131 number, but just went on forever.
Yep. All right, Jared. I'll get police to come and see you, okay? All right. Thanks, Jared. Bye-bye.
45-year-old Jared Baden Clay married Allison in 1997. The couple travelled the world before settling in Brookfield in 2000, where they had 3 daughters. The family were well known and loved, and when Allison disappeared, police immediately established a task force and rallied the community into action.
Obviously there was deep concern, and at that stage no one knew what had happened. Nobody in the general community, that is.
I got a call from the police asking to use our clubhouse as a command post.
The search was structured from Brookfield Oval, and I remember the emergency services out trawling creeks, trawling parks, trawling the neighbourhoods, searching for any sign of her. Search parties started forming. SES workers were looking in all areas, and volunteers were turning out, families in the area, neighbours. You could tell that it was a close-knit community who really cared for this woman.
I went down there to see the police, and that's when I met Allison's parents and extended family.
Brookfield Oval, in the centre of town, acted as a focal point for the police investigation and was located just 200 metres from the Baden Clay home. As the search progressed with local residents and volunteers involved, police held an appeal for information. It fell to Allison's parents, Jeff and Priscilla Dickey, determined to do whatever it took to find their daughter, to face the daunting task of speaking to the media.
Please, please help us to find our dear Allison. Our lives will never be the same. We must find her.
When Allison's parents did make the public appeal, it was incredibly emotional, incredibly upsetting. You could tell that they were so worried, they were so concerned about Allison's disappearance.
They were concerned for her well-being, very concerned, and she was much loved, well-loved person.
I think it became one of the most covered crime cases in Australia in about a decade. There was huge interest. It became not just a state story of relevance in Brisbane. Sydney was interested. For Sydney to be interested, that's big. So the network, it became a network story. And from there, we really had to be mindful of that and not missing anything, not missing any detail, not missing any scandal, not missing any reaction outside of the house, not missing a shot. We had to be really, really mindful, and that's when it became so life-consuming as well.
Whilst Allison's devoted parents worked with the media and the police desperate for any clues that may help find their beloved daughter, the actions of Baden Clay himself started to raise questions.
Normally, someone's partner goes missing. They're there. They're distraught. They're upset. They can't sleep. They're just frantic.
Very strange. Very strange. I thought he would have been down there from dawn to dusk like Jeff and Priscilla were.
Where the hell was he? Why wasn't he out in these search parties?
As Gerard Baden Clay retreated further from public scrutiny, the media became more insistent on finding him, and within days were tracking his every move.
It was 4 days after Allison went missing. We knew at that time it was very strange that Gerard hadn't been out actively looking for his wife and had moved in with his parents. My cameraman and I went straight to his parents' home and saw the door open. So we ran over to the driveway and Gerard did walk straight to us. And I thought, wow, we're very lucky he's going to say something here.
I'm trying to look after my children at the moment. They've got 3 young girls and we really trust that the police are doing everything they can to find my wife. And
it was strange that he wasn't just standing there and saying, please, I beg you, give me some information about my missing wife. It was very unusual. I thought his eye contact was very strange. He didn't look at me. He kept kind of looking back and forth, looking to the ground, and his voice was quite high. It was quite strained.
We just hope that she'll come home soon. And I need to go now to an appointment.
From his sister's body language, she looks so nervous. There'll be people who'll be able to read your body language, read the intonation in your voice.
Being a crime reporter is very difficult. You've got to try and not become emotionally involved in a case, but that's very difficult. You're hearing a lot of horrific detail, a lot of detail that the public is really never going to hear. But I knew after doing that interview with Gerard Baden Clay on the driveway that day that this was a different case. In 12 years, I have probably covered around 30 murders, been exposed to a lot of terrible detail, had to talk to many victims of crime, and always trying to do that with respect. And in some ways you can become desensitised to a lot of information you're hearing. But I would really say this story became a career-defining moment for me, because never had there been such public interest in a case. We watched that tape over and over, and everyone commented on his eye contact or lack of. My cameraman said, something's not right with this guy. He was not genuine. It was not a concerned husband. It was not a desperate husband looking to find his wife. I felt he was covering something up. I did speak to one of my police contacts, and his first question when he heard that I had interviewed him was, did you see any scratches on his face?
On the right-hand side of Gerard's face were a number of distinct and possibly incriminating deep scratch marks.
At that point in time, I didn't know there were scratches. I wasn't looking for them. I went straight back to the tape. I had a look at it, and Gerard had been shielding that side of his face. When police did arrive at the house, he was very cool. He was quite calm, but they immediately noticed the scratches.
I should clarify, I cut myself shaving this morning and everybody has said that looks suspicious.
It does.
And that's part of the reason I think that you're here.
It doesn't look like a shaving cut.
In 2012, Gerard Baden Clay called police to report that his wife Allison was missing. When police responded, they noticed scratch marks on his face, which he claimed were from a shaving accident.
I should clarify, I cut myself shaving this morning and everybody has said that looks suspicious.
This explanation raised immediate suspicions, and police were keen to investigate further into the life of the real estate agent, who was familiar to residents in the Brookfield area.
Gerard was very well known in the community. He was this apparent high-profile real estate agent. He was president of the Chamber of Commerce at some point. He made himself known wherever he went.
Probably the first I became aware of the family was the Baden Clay team was this trio, Gerard Baden Clay's father, his mother, and Gerard himself are all wearing the gold jackets, the franchise they belong to. I must admit, right from the start, I thought that it was a little bit on the back foot for an agent wanting to promote himself to have his mum and dad there. I felt I couldn't take them seriously.
He was just trying to be too cool.
A lot of self-importance, really not seriously in touch with his audience, not communicating on a real level. I know a lot of people were taken in by him. I felt he was phony and he was condescending and there wasn't a real person there.
Oh, he was someone you couldn't sort of like warm to as such.
Word of mouth is extremely important, and it doesn't matter so much whether you wear the latest suit or what you drive. It's whether when they talk to you, whether they feel you're relating on a genuine level and that they can trust you.
A lot of people knew him. He was a bit of a man about town, I guess. And this is what really attracted the community, the audience, to this case.
Gerard Baden Clay's reputation as a respectable professional and husband continued to come under scrutiny when details surfaced that would fuel further speculation and doubt.
We'd found out that Gerard had been involved in a car crash.
Just after 3 p.m. on Sunday the 22nd of April, Gerard was involved in a minor car accident. Police revealed that Gerard had undergone medical tests for visible injuries on his body the day Allison went missing, and was being recalled for further examinations when the crash occurred.
He was actually on his way to undergo more DNA testing to have more photographs of injuries sustained, the scratches on his face, the markings on his chest.
Gerard had told police that he suffered a reaction to a caterpillar bite, which left red abrasions on his chest and neck. Tests would later prove that no species of caterpillar that could cause such reactions were present in the area where the Baden Clays lived.
Perhaps the car crash that he was involved in, he was trying to disguise the injuries already there with fresh ones from the car crash.
I just thought there's more to this than meets the eye.
We understood why the whole thing was looking incredibly suspicious.
As the search for Allison continued, rumours began to circulate around the town, and the Baden Clay family appeared to close ranks.
Generally speaking, the media was treading with caution and concern, and I feel respect for Allison's family. It was a very different front in regard to the Baden Clays. They were always trying to hide from us, even escaping through neighbours' yards, jumping into different cars, borrowing friends' cars. It was just always quite strange that they weren't more cooperative with the media in the search for Allison.
I found it quite distasteful the way his parents were reacting to it, and that they didn't appear to have any real concern.
There was a team A in the community and a team B. There's a larger team supporting the Dickies.
As Allison's family maintained a vigil at Task Force Base, police asked Brookfield residents to search their properties, while over 400 emergency service volunteers on foot and horseback continued the search for Allison 10 days after she went missing.
The area was also quite residential, but there were some big properties as well. It was a very wealthy area, so police had encouraged landowners to search whenever they could as well to see if there was any trace of Allison, any clothing, anything which might help them with the investigation. So the community really became involved and part of this search as well. And that, I guess, really showed the concern for her. And also what I guess we could say was, I think, most people involved were expecting that a body would be found. You know, a mother of 3 beautiful young girls does not just walk out on her kids.
The Brisbane River is a good place for kayaking, and it's really nice to go kayaking early in the morning. Probably most people don't even know exists. It's very quiet in that part of the river.
Daryl Joyce, a professor of horticulture and resident of Brisbane's western suburbs, was enjoying the first morning of his holidays.
The first time I knew that the lady had gone missing was on the news. It kept going on for days and days. I became sort of most aware when they'd sort of set up a mannequin of the missing lady, dressed her up in the way that she was when she'd gone missing. And because it was local, naturally we all wanted to know what was happening, took a special interest in it.
Colo Creek is 14 kilometres from Brookfield. It's a small side creek that flows into the Brisbane River. Famed for its nature reserves and rich vegetation, the river and side creeks are often inaccessible on foot.
The Colo Creek itself, when you come off the Brisbane River, it's got a wide opening. I paddled upstream because that's the best way to go with the tides that day. And as I got closer to the bridge, I saw a body lying on the creek bank immediately underneath. And then as I got closer, there was a sort of smell. I still kept going past just to try and understand what was going on, and then I recognised the clothes, because that mannequin that they had in the park somewhere in Brookfield was dressed in the sort of three-quarter length pants, I think it was. And I figured out what it was, and I didn't stay around. There's no way you can get out of the kayak and do anything there anyway. You just end up falling in the water. So I just shot home and rang the police.
The woman's body, found yesterday on a creek bed, yet to be formally identified.
We're treating it very seriously that it may be her.
The grim discovery marked the tragic end of the 10-day search. The body was confirmed to be that of Allison Baden Clay. Questions were now asked as to how had this much-loved mother of three ended up on the edge of a creek bed 14 kilometres from her family home.
Police are appealing to anyone that may have seen anything suspicious on the night that Miss Baden Clay went missing. In particular, they're asking for people that may have seen one of the two family cars, any evidence that there may have been some suspicious activity in this area.
Allison's body had been found and a sinister side had been put to the whole investigation. This officially became a murder investigation.
In 2012, Allison Baden Clay, a married mother of three young daughters, had gone missing in Brisbane's western suburbs. After 10 days of extensive searches and round-the-clock efforts by police and volunteers, a canoeist made a grisly discovery in a creek 14 kilometres from Allison's home. Tragically for her family, what was a missing persons case was now a murder investigation.
It was so sad for her family, incredibly sad. There were three little girls without a mother.
I felt it deeply because of my happy memories there with my family, and this is an horrific act.
When we did hear the news, it was incredibly sad. It was, and I know all of the police involved were very moved, saddened, upset for these three little girls who are now without a mother, upset for Allison's parents, her siblings, the community at large, her friends, because they'd all gathered around to try and find this woman who was, you know, a kind, loving, beautiful, professional, incredibly intelligent.
As Allison's family and friends came to terms with their tragic loss, police intensified their investigation, and further information surfaced that would cast a shadow on what had appeared to be a flawless family.
After Allison's body was found, this idea of a perfect family in Brookfield was really shattered. Information started to come out, or was revealed to us, that Gerard had been having an affair. We found out who the woman was that he was having an affair with, Tony McHugh.
He said to me,
I need you to know that I love you and that I am going to be leaving my wife.
Tony McHugh began working for Gerard in 2008. Their affair began in August of that year. When Allison discovered her husband's infidelity in September 2011 and demanded the couple seek counselling, Gerard ended the affair briefly until the lovers rekindled their romance just 3 months later.
I remember the day when she was driven into Indooroopilly CIB into the police station and wearing glasses, and she was obviously not wanting any media exposure, but she was the unknown woman, the mistress, and pretty much straight away the feeling within the community as well was very negative towards her, obviously very negative towards Gerard.
His philandering, if you like, wasn't a total secret through the community and through the real estate industry.
Gerard Baden Clay had made promises to Tony McHugh regarding leaving his wife. The night before Allison went missing, she learned that both women would also be attending an industry conference the next day. McHugh was livid at the possibility of a confrontation with Allison, and in a heated phone call with Gerard, she demanded he tell his wife about the affair.
This was a very, very juicy story. Every little bit of detail about Gerard Baden Clay was just being lapped up out in the public. Everyone wanted to hear about the scandal. Everyone wanted to hear about what he'd done, what was the latest.
If you sat down and tried to get a well-off area, happy family, and then create this dark sort of background mystery, you couldn't have written a better story.
As police dug deeper, the private life of Gerard Baden Clay began to untangle spectacularly in public view as more startling revelations came to light.
We also began to find out that Gerard was in a lot of financial difficulty. He'd also bumped up Allison's life insurance policy.
Gerard Baden Clay immediately lodged a claim on his wife's life insurance the day her body was found.
It's a supreme arrogance and feeling that he could just pull the wool over everybody's eyes and they'd buy it. They'd just buy it.
All of these factors were really pointing towards something incredibly suspicious about this case. It was not a golden, perfect family. There were a lot of cracks in this marriage.
Affairs, financial difficulties, life insurance policies, and a major task force investigating his wife's murder. The deck was being stacked against Gerard Baden Clay, and every detail of his personal life was played out in public view.
All eyes were on Gerard Baden Clay, so that ramped up our coverage to a whole other level. It's pretty much 24/7 coverage of his parents' house.
I don't think I've ever known a tragedy of this kind to have so much publicity. Quite often you'll hear about it on the news and you might hear it in the morning. You'd be lucky if you hear it in the evening, 1 or 2 days and it's gone.
Everyone was talking about this case. It was a massive ratings period for TV news bulletins in Brisbane at that time.
With the salacious details of Gerard Baden Clay's life now publicly exposed, police carefully considered every detail of the case, and their investigation intensified to include personal possessions.
There continued to be a huge police presence at Gerard Baden Clay's parents' house. On several occasions in the coming days and weeks, detectives would go to the house. I remember one particular day they left carrying a lot of brown paper bags, so we knew that they were taking evidence to examine back at the police station.
The location of Allison's body also helped police with vital clues that would identify her movements before and after death. Dr. Gordon Guymer, a forensic botanist and director of the Queensland Herbarium, was instrumental in assisting police in the murder investigation.
I worked on the leaf material that was collected from the head and shoulders and hair of Allison Baden Clay. Then I could identify there was leaves from 6 different species. There was no other material, no other botanical material, which I would have expected there would have been some grass seeds or some other material, but there wasn't, which I was a bit surprised. So then I rang the police and said that I'd now like to go to Colo Creek and then to the house.
Forensic experts revealed that Allison's body had lay undisturbed on the bank of Colo Creek for 10 days. Dr. Geimer had expected more local plant material to be present on her body, and the lack of this seemed unusual.
I did a full survey of that Colo Creek area where the body was found, recorded all the species, got my binoculars out and scanned up and down the creek, and basically could only see 2 of the 6 species that I'd found in her hair.
These missing species led Dr. Geimer to one inevitable conclusion. The other plant matter must have come from a different location, suggesting her body had been moved to the creek from elsewhere.
And then we moved to 593 Brookfield Road to the house, and all the 6 species were present. So then I went back to the detective and I said, I can see six species, all 6 species are there.
Dr. Geimer's botanical discoveries were proof that specific leaves from the Brookfield home were present in Allison's hair. This then begged the question, how did those leaves get there?
The only explanation I sort of heard put forward by the husband was that she'd gone for a walk early in the morning and then, something had gone wrong. I know that it's a long way from where she would have been walking at Brookfield, and impossible that she would have walked that far.
I decided that I needed to do far more investigation and more or less walked that 14 kilometres, recorded all the species along that route, and particularly the 6 species that were found in her hair. There was no part of that road which had all 6 species, so therefore it was impossible that the leaves in her hair could have got there by walking the 14 kilometres from her house to Colo Creek.
"43-year-old Allison Baden Clay's body had been found under a bridge 10 days after she was first reported missing. While her remains underwent forensic testing to determine what had happened to the young mother of 3, Dr. Gordon Geimer's botanical expertise led to an alarming discovery that shifted the focus to the Brookfield home, where the evidence suggested Allison had died.
The presence of species in the forensic evidence is critical in looking at crime reconstruction and possible scenarios of where Allison was at certain times. On the botanical evidence alone and a possible scenario, she was likely to be on the back patio area. That's consistent with the leaves, the age of the leaves, the species that occurred in her hair. So if the scenario is that she got to the car, she must have been carried to the car from the rear patio and then no doubt transported to Colo Creek. There's no doubt about that, because there's no other species that link her to any other site, and the evidence would indicate possibly carried and then dumped into Colo Creek. When I was there, you got lots of seeds and grasses on your clothing, would indicate that she must have been carried and put into Colo Creek.
More shocking revelations began to surface as police carried out forensic tests on Allison's car. Traces of her blood were discovered in the boot and on the door.
I remember a day that detectives arrived at the house. That day in particular, we knew something was going on. We all got particularly anxious. We thought, wow, I wonder if today's going to be the day that they'll arrest him. Everyone assumed that was going to happen, and we were just waiting. We were on 24-hour standby.
This whole scenario is like a classic Agatha Christie story.
Just 6 weeks after the discovery of Allison's body at Colo Creek, police were focusing their investigations on one suspect. Gerard Baden Clay was taken to the police headquarters and interviewed.
Gerard had gone into the station with his lawyer. We all jumped into the news cars to get over to Indooroopilly CIB. Everyone was set up, ready to go. And I remember it wasn't a long period of time before Gerard Baden-Clay's lawyer did surface and said that his client had been charged. So he'd effectively been charged with the murder of his wife.
Denying any involvement, Gerard was arrested and charged with his wife's murder. The elaborate web of lies and deceit this apparently devoted husband and father had spun began to unravel dramatically in public view.
It was adrenaline overload. We were expecting it to happen, but I think everyone was almost in shock. I don't feel anyone was surprised, but there was a real relief, and finally this has happened. Finally this guy is going to have to face court. I'd become so engrossed and involved in this case for 2 months that it really was a bittersweet moment when he was arrested. When a young mother is killed, is found dead, and she's got 3 young girls, and you see how grief-stricken her family is, it just doesn't affect the immediate family as well. It's friends, it's the wider community. It was shocking.
My feelings were towards the daughters, towards her parents, the Dickies, and trying not to, express my anger towards him.
With the local real estate agent in custody, everybody braced themselves for what was sure to be an explosive trial. After 2 years of investigations, 1,500 lines of inquiry, and 500 witness statements, the trial began in June 2014, with police and prosecutors confident in their case against Gerard Baden-Clay.
Yes, this is a very challenging case. I'm not there to join the dots, I'm there to provide the dots. And I was hopeful that the evidence I gave in court assisted the jury in making their decision.
Really interesting to see then how all of the pieces fell into place. There's little bits of information that were trickled to us, then that made sense. It was all fascinating to follow it and see how it all played out in the courts.
At the very start of the trial, Gerard Baden-Clay pleaded not guilty, claiming he had nothing to do with his wife's disappearance or death. During the court proceedings, extracts from Allison's diary were read aloud to the jury, revealing a wife and mother struggling with her marriage.
What really struck a chord with me was how troubled this marriage was, and information that came out from Allison's diaries. Outside, they looked like the perfect family. Successful real estate agent, beautiful, kind, friendly, loving, professional woman. They had 3 beautiful kids. Everyone loved the family. Definitely loved Allison and her children anyway. And what was so sad is that there was this woman who was battling on the inside and was not revealing any of that information to anyone.
Allison's diary revealed a heartbreaking existence within a troubled marriage. Insecurities arising from Gerard's continued infidelity, his refusal to be intimate, psychological and emotional abuse resulting in frustrations regarding body image and self-worth destabilised a strong and proud woman.
What went on behind closed doors, a lot of people didn't know about it, even though her friends did pick up certain behaviours and said they didn't like Gerard Baden-Clay. But Allison continued to gloss over it all.
Following 2 years of investigations, a month-long trial and 5 days of deliberations, on the 15th of July 2014, jurors delivered their unanimous verdict.
Guilty. Gerard Baden-Clay went from suburban real estate salesman to cold-blooded killer.
Gerard Baden-Clay, a 46-year-old father of 3, was sentenced to life imprisonment for the murder of his wife, Allison, and ordered to serve a minimum term of 15 years.
Thank God, this bastard who's done this to this beautiful, caring, kind, lovely woman is going to be behind bars.
Yes, it was a very rewarding experience working with the Queensland Police, and I was very impressed with the way they operated, how professional they were, how precise, meticulous.
We never got to meet Allison, but dealing with the Dickey family and the extended family, after this lengthy investigation, I feel we know her.
It was relief for the family of Allison Baden Clay.
So those girls didn't lose just the mother, they lost the father as well.
I hope also for the daughters that whilst they've been robbed of the pleasure of their mother for the rest of their life, that I feel there's something of her spirit will always be with them. And I just feel that her love is with them.
For the family and friends of Allison, however, the relief was short-lived. In December 2015, after lodging an appeal, Gerard Baden Clay's conviction for murder was substituted for one of manslaughter.
There were gasps as 3 judges handed down their ruling, saying there was not enough evidence to prove he intended to kill Allison.
The news of the downgrading was met with widespread criticism, not least from Allison's friends and relatives.
Justice has not been served to Allison and her family.
The condemnation of the downgrading has helped shine a light on the growing and troubling issue of domestic violence, a problem that is affecting the whole of Australia.
Domestic violence happens everywhere, but she's really highlighted to the wider community that it's something we need to give focus to.
I think what it highlighted for me is that the media were focusing on what they didn't even know was a common problem.
Diane Mangan is the CEO of DV Connect Brisbane, a statewide telephone service offering help and support to anyone affected by domestic or family violence.
I've been working in the field of domestic violence and child abuse for 40 years. Many women are living with domestic violence. They are married to men who have standing in the community. These are sometimes women who have standing in the community themselves.
I think it brings to light that it can happen to any community, be it in a wealthy community like Brookfield or a lower socioeconomic community. There's no barriers.
Sometimes women need to know that it's not a shame factor, that they need to reach out to the family. And it's important for the family to let them know that.
If anything can be taken from this terrible situation, she's become a poster girl for domestic violence. And as a consequence, we see what's happening in Australian government at the moment. So much more funding is being allocated to domestic violence issues. It is very warming to see that perhaps other women can benefit from campaigning and funding and awareness which has been generated from this terrible, terrible story.
In a fitting tribute to Allison after her death, the Allison's Gift Foundation was established by family and friends. The organisation assists young victims of crime by providing financial assistance and support.
It's generally a family in pain that is driven to activism that leads the country into a change of attitude. This is where these changes come from. It's the death, the tragedies that propel families to want to keep it focused. And communities feel a great sense of compassion for something that's led by people who are suffering.
Whilst she's gone, the goodness from her life has just become magnanimous, and it's just, that part of it is brilliant. I hope it gathers momentum, and I hope that people really get behind it. And I know the Brookfield community will keep it going because she was so well loved.
Yellow is significant to the foundation, as it was Allison's favourite colour. And the lighting of Brisbane's Story Bridge on July the 31st, 2015, was in memory of Allison and other victims of domestic violence.
The lighting up of the bridge, the yellow, the flowers. She was so talented, she was intelligent, She'd had a really good career and she gave it all up to become, you know, his wife and help him out with his business, and end up paying the ultimate price for it.
If anything positive can be taken from this tragedy, is that perhaps more awareness is being raised for other victims of family violence and the foundation that her friends and family have set up. And also we see what's happening within the Australian government is actually acting at the moment as well and devoting more funding to domestic violence. And it's really, you can really hope that from this case perhaps other women who are suffering in similar situations will come forward, even tell a friend, even a family member, just talk to someone about it so that something so extreme and tragic never has to happen again.